government, everyone.
Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want to protect yourself against anything that's a potential viral infection?
Was any of it to potentially protect others as well?
What? No, just more for myself.
Just for you?
I'm very selfish in that front, no.
My mother's diabetic and my father's in a care home, so it's mainly, I mean, I've gone through mental health issues and depression, so not so I don't value my life as much due to going through a severe bout of depression, but I value other people's around me.
Can I just ask you, it's emerged that Pfizer now have come out and said that they didn't know at the time that they were rolling this out whether or not the COVID vaccine actually stopped you giving it to others.
Okay, no, I think...
Do you think they could have been more honest about that?
Of course they should, yeah, 100% it should have been, yeah, because that was the whole point of it, right? It was to stop us spreading it.
Don't kill well.
Yeah. I mean, how much did we see that on the TV? And if that's not the case and we was misled, then someone's got answers to questions to answer, certainly.
Lots of questions to answer here. Why were we not told at the time that Pfizer had not tested to see if that vaccine actually stopped transmission? Why did Pfizer themselves not step in and stop the likes of your usual TV doctor types and your Chris Whitties of this world actually telling us that it prevented transmission to a degree? Why is that? Could there be big money involved? I'll be finding that out, hopefully, throughout the course of this show. But I want to hear from you. Knowing what you know now, would you get jabbed? Did you feel pressure? Did you feel coerced? Did you feel manipulated into getting it? Or, actually, would you get jabbed up to the eyeballs all over again? All views are welcome here. GBViews at gbnews.uk. We are going to be talking about it later on with a couple of guests. We are desperately trying to get one of those usual medical types on, the people that we normally can't move for. We have just one phone call, one ring it is, and they're straight on to talk about something. They'd have been straight on if we were talking about how good the jab is, but no. They're all suspiciously busy today. I wonder why that is. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Before we get stuck into that, we're going to do something a little bit more political, because first, Liz Truss faced Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer in her first Prime Minister's question since the conference recessed this afternoon. They clashed over the government's economic plans, including taxation and public spending. Crucially, the Prime Minister said she wouldn't cut public spending. In fact, she said she absolutely wouldn't cut it, which is pretty much binding, despite a lot of pressure to do so. Let's just have a quick reminder from earlier today.
Mr. Speaker, this morning, the Business Secretary toured the TV studios arguing that the turmoil in the markets has nothing to do with her budget. Does the Prime Minister agree with him?
Well, Mr. Speaker, what we have done is we have taken decisive action. We have taken decisive action to make sure that people are not facing energy bills of £6,000 for 2 years. And I think we remember the opposition is only talking about 6 months. We've also taken decisive action to make sure that we are not facing the highest taxes for 70 years in the face of a global economic slowdown. And what we're making sure is that we protect our economy at this very difficult time internationally. And as a result of our action, Mr. Speaker, and this has been independently corroborated, we will see higher growth and lower inflation.
OK, the way that Liz Truss was wearing a dress the same colour as the chair behind her made it look a bit like a talking head for a while there, didn't it? But let's just cross over now to Westminster, the epicentre, the seat of power, to speak to GB News' political reporter, Catherine Forster. Catherine, thank you very much. Lots of pressure on Prime Minister Liz Truss today. How did she perform, do you think?
I think on balance, she performed pretty well. I mean, she is under a phenomenal amount of pressure, isn't she? This is only her second PMQs that she's ever done. In fact, only the second Prime Minister's questions since Parliament broke up for recess back in the summer, because there was then the recess for the party conferences and, of course, when the Queen died. So a bit out of the habit of Prime Minister's questions. But I think she performed more fluently than she often does when she's making a speech, like at party conference last week. She simply ignored a number of Keir Starmer's questions. She said something very clearly at the very beginning, which was that the government were not going to drop the ban on no-fault evictions, which was being floated yesterday. That's not going to happen. And something else that she was unexpectedly, I think, clear on was during the leadership campaign, she had been asked about cuts to public services and she had said that she wouldn't do so. Keir Starmer asked her clearly if she stood by that, and she said absolutely. Now, only of course yesterday, the Institute for Fiscal Studies was saying that was a £60 billion black hole in the public finances from Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng's plans, and inferring that major cuts would have to be made. Now, the Prime Minister today has implied that that is not going to happen. So it will be fascinating to see when the 31st of October rolls around, if indeed we wait that long for the Chancellor's medium-term fiscal plan and the OBR forecast, what is going to give here? Because clearly the markets are in turmoil. How are they going to square the circle of major tax cuts without cutting public spending? It's curious. We don't have the answer yet.
Well, I'll tell you what I think is equally curious is the idea of releasing a financial statement on Halloween. I mean, the optics of that are absolutely terrible. I don't know who's advising them to do that, but they absolutely should do it before Halloween or after, certainly not on the day itself. The headlines write themselves. But, Catherine, has Liz Truss thrown Kwasi Kwarteng under the bus, as she accused him of being thrown under the bus initially, but then, of course, now maybe it's the Governor of the Bank of England she's throwing under the bus. Has she got a very big bus?
Well, of course, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have been for many, many years very close. They came into Parliament together in 2010. Ideologically, they have been in lockstep. They're both free market, small state, low tax libertarians. They came in with this grand plan to be disruptors, and unfortunately for them, so far, the markets have not warmed to that. I think possibly because of the language that they used, possibly partly because of the lack of the OBR forecast. And of course, Liz Truss is very keen to point out there are global factors, and also perhaps the Bank of England were slow to raise interest rates. But there are signs of cracks in her relationship with the Chancellor. Certainly some speculation that ultimately he might have to go. I think that would be extremely difficult for her, but it seems likely now, although they are denying this, that parts of that anything but mini budget that was announced only a couple of weeks ago will have to be dropped. Potentially the not raising corporation tax from 19 to 25%, which was what Rishi Sunak, the previous Chancellor, was going to do, that could save them a lot of money. But of course, that was central to the Chancellor's plan for growth. So really no easy options.
No.
But of course, blaming the Bank of England, Jacob Rees-Mogg was on GB News a little earlier. He was very careful to row back on his language from earlier today. Doesn't really reassure the markets at a time that they're obviously very jittery.
Catherine Forster, thank you very, very much from Westminster. Just reviewing Liz Truss's second PMQs. We're going to be continuing a little bit with our political and economic theme, but just a quick reminder, GBViews at gbnews.uk. The inbox is in front of me and it's been lighting up about these Pfizer revelations that actually they hadn't tested to see whether or not the COVID jab would stop transmissibility of the coronavirus before, essentially, we were all told to get the jab, otherwise you might kill your grandma and have your civil liberties taken off you. GBViews at gbnews.uk. We'll be returning to that throughout the show. But also today, Liz Truss said the government is working to protect the public from rising energy bills amid accusations that plans for a cap on the revenues of renewable energy generators, bit of a mouthful that, and nuclear power plants amounts to a windfall tax. So the move could hit the profits of energy companies like Scottish Power and SSE, who generate from record high wholesale power prices. So essentially, windfall tax. These big energy companies apparently making loads of money out of our misery. Now they're going to be taxed on it. But all is not as it seems, people, as we're going to discuss, because the government insists it's not imposing a windfall tax. Labour argues that it's doing just that. Ministers say the link between soaring gas prices, renewable and nuclear energy must be broken. That's why they're capping the price of older, low-carbon electricity production, what they say will be a temporary limit on company revenues. Joining me now is Malcolm Grimson, a senior research fellow at Imperial College. Malcolm, thank you very, very much. Look, Just to cut through a bit of the noise on all of this, I can't help but wonder, if we hadn't listened so much to Greta Thunberg, would our bills be costing the amount that they are now?
I mean, it's certainly the case that we need to look again at producing gas in the United Kingdom, because we've become extremely dependent on imports. That being said, the climate is in difficulties, and I do believe that climate change is real, and we need to move in that direction. But of course, at the moment, the short-term issues are around people's bills and getting through the next year or two, and we need to balance that need with the longer-term need for the environment.
Just paint that line that these energy companies are making unbelievable profits at the moment, and that we need to give them a windfall tax. Does it actually work out like that? Have their costs of production not gone up? The cost of exploration, for example? And of course, a lot of them are, in fact, investing or trying to do a lot of research into green renewable energy, aren't they? Are they actually profiting that much out of our misery?
Well, the discussion at the moment is about the low carbon sources. So it's not about oil and gas, where the exploration costs are significant and always have been. It's more that at the moment, because for electricity, it's actually the gas price that more or less sets the electricity price. And it is the case that those sources like renewables and nuclear, which don't depend on gas, have seen their profits increase very significantly. Having said that, energy is a long-term business. You can't just look at what happens in one particular year. You have to look really over something like 30 years, typically, between the initial investment being made and it having fully paid off that investment. We've had long periods where nobody was making any money at all out of electricity. In fact, the whole industry went bust in the early 2000s. And you need to balance that with periods where they are making very significant amounts of profit. Otherwise, they won't invest.
OK, look, Malcolm, thank you very much. Short and sweet, but I think we got right to the point there. Malcolm Grimston, a Senior Research Fellow at Imperial College. Now, ladies and gentlemen, a bit of a gear change this, OK? It's a story that I've been desperate to cover. I feel very, very passionate about this, and I'm sure that a lot of you will as well. We all remember that shocking, terrible case of poor little James Bolger. Well, James Bolger's mother has now written to Prime Minister Liz Truss in an attempt to block her son's evil, depraved killer from being granted parole. Why is this even a question? There's reports that the parole board is preparing to decide whether to release one of the toddler's killers, John Venables, from prison. Now, a little bit of context here about John Venables. Venables has reoffended twice since being convicted of the toddler's murder in 1993. Some of that includes child abuse images on his computer. The Justice Secretary has the power to intervene to prevent him from being freed. Joining me now is forensic psychologist Dr. Kerry Nixon. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to ask a question now that I can't help but think that a lot of viewers and listeners might be thinking. Is the only way to make sure that depraved offenders, people who commit sick, twisted crimes against children, is the only way to make sure they don't do that again to bring back the death penalty?
As a forensic psychologist and somebody that's worked in this area for 25 years, I don't agree with the death penalty. I wouldn't do the job that I do if I don't believe in some form of rehabilitation. However, I do absolutely agree that in certain cases, things like whole life tariffs have to be used. There are people that remain a danger to society.
He did what he did when it came to James Bolger, one of the most violent and horrific deaths that anyone could ever imagine on someone so vulnerable. There's a reason why this case has continued to grip the nation. He's then gone out and been done for child porn, essentially. This guy, can he ever be rehabilitated?
That's the really important point that you've just made there. As an adult, he is reoffended twice. Not once, twice. And also, when we consider the indecent images of children that he had, they were in category A. And category A indecent images are the most serious type. They would have been really disturbing images. They were reported to include things like pain and distress in the images of the children. So we have to think about his reoffending now as an adult. He's 40 years of age now, and he's still reoffending. And the parole board, in their assessments recently, have talked about current risk factors. He thinks about sex a lot. He's got problems maintaining relationship. He's got a lack of self-awareness, an inability to deal with stress, ongoing employment difficulties when he was in the community. This is a man that hasn't just got historical risk factors, he's got current risk factors, and that's what we need to focus on.
Can I talk to you a little bit, as in your profession? I know you're a forensic psychologist, but you're obviously very well trained, generally, we would imagine, when it comes to psychology. The psychology of the people on a parole board that might consider releasing this chap back out into the wild, because let's be honest, it's not them who he's going to be living next door to. And I can't help but wonder how they sleep at night, knowing, if indeed they decide to, knowing that this guy's back out on the streets.
The thing is, when you've got a parole board, they have to adhere to sentencing guidelines, they have to adhere to, does this person pose a current risk to society? That's the question they're answering. And as a professional, you have to remove emotion. As a mother, as a member of society, I share the absolute disgust in this case. But as a professional, I have to work from a professional point of view, and that's what those parole board members will do. However, I think many, many mistakes are made in parole hearings. I do. I've often been involved myself, and I've disagreed with the results. And I think the parole board, the whole system, needs looking at. There's been so many recent cases where mistakes have been made. Risk assessments are conducted, and the risk assessment in this case is that he is a high risk. And unless something, an absolute miracle has happened, I don't see how that's changed.
Well, no, of course. I mean, there's absolutely no way anyone convinced me that a bloke that kills the toddler in such a horrific way then goes on to watch some of the worst categories of child porn that one could imagine, and goodness knows what else, frankly, will ever be safe to walk the streets of Britain. And I personally would not do him the courtesy of giving him a fake identity either, but that's just me. Dr. Kerry, thank you very much. Dr. Kerry Nixon, I'm going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Of course, a forensic psychologist just reacting, if you're just joining us, to the news that one of James Bulger's killers, John Venables, may be about to be back out on the streets. How do you feel about that? GBViews at gbnews.uk. Coming up, economists have roundly rejected Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg's claim that the UK financial turmoil was not being driven by the mini-budget. He blamed the Bank of England. More on that economic turmoil, how it might be hit and how it might indeed hit the pound in your pocket, with our economics editor, Liam Halligan. We want to break it down for you, OK? How does it really affect you? Liam's going to cut through the jargon. And I have been asking throughout the show as well, GBViews at gbnews.uk, knowing what you know now about the fact that Pfizer did not check to see if their vaccine stopped transmissibility before they put it out onto the market. Do you feel pressured and conned into taking the jab, or would you take it again? Back in a moment.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, Liz Truss has faced MPs in the House of Commons as she faces mounting pressure on her government's economic strategy. Turbulence continues in the financial markets today, and with the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey declaring that the bank will not extend its support into markets from Friday, and reports from the Office of National Statistics saying that we're one step closer to recession. What does all of this actually mean? Joining me now is our economics and business editor, the one and only Liam Halligan, with On the Money. Right, Liam, I thoroughly enjoyed our chat yesterday because I felt like we cut through the noise, frankly, and didn't just parrot the old doom and gloom and everything that's been going on. What have we got for us today?
It's kind of a mixed picture, actually. I mean, the headline you just read out, yeah, the pound did fall this morning, but it's pretty much recovered since then against the dollar. And yes, the Office for National Statistics did suggest that the economy contracted last month. I say suggest because it's a monthly number, it's a preliminary number, and these numbers are revised at least twice, sometimes three times before they become actual numbers. And last month, of course, we saw bank holidays, the Queen's funeral, and so on, which kind of stymied a lot of economic activity. In fact, the International Monetary Fund says the UK is going to grow faster this year than any other G7 economy by 3.6%. So it is a very mixed picture. That's not to say there aren't big concerns out there, and there are, because what we call the 10-year gilt yield, stay with me, where the government, that's where the government borrows money for 10 years. That's the kind of the bedrock of the financial system. Mortgage rates, personal loans rates are kind of benchmarked against, they're higher, but they're set. That's the floor of them. That is now about 4.5%, up from 3.5% before Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget on the 23rd of September. But at least for now, it seems steady. So I think the market has swallowed the idea that Andrew Bailey put forward this morning in a speech when he said, we're not going to intervene anymore after Friday. Whether or not they can hold that line remains to be seen. But for now, at least, there's a bit of stability, and borrowing costs seem to be relatively steady, albeit higher than they were a month ago.
So if I'm just, Margaret from Margate, or just, your average man or woman on the street, right, I shouldn't be as catastrophically depressed about the state of my economy as I might be forgiven for being if I was just, I don't know, watching the BBC or something.
Yeah, I think all broadcasters, to be fair, deal in iconoclasm. The budget, the fiscal accounts, it's always either a war chest or a black hole. People like me have to come in and give some kind of proper analysis because we actually know stuff in terms of what's going on the economy. It is a concern. This is a period of financial turmoil, and we are in a long-term increase in interest rates. Interest rates have been going up since January. Remember I showed you that graph yesterday?
You did.
Which I think was a bit of a breakthrough. Certainly a lot of people have been citing similar numbers on other broadcasters that I've seen. What I showed you yesterday was a graph that back in January this year, average mortgage costs were about 2.5%, and now they're up at 6%. But it had been very much a steady increase through the spring, the summer, before the mini budget. Yeah, there's been a bit more of an uptick since the mini budget, but this is a long-term trend that's going on. I think Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, they've been like the catalyst for this big increase in interest rates rather than fueling the big increase in interest rates. The big increase in interest rates has been a very long time in the making because we had ultra-low interest rates for 10 years after the global financial crisis. Far too low, in my view, and that's why a lot of people got themselves deeply into debt, trying to buy massively overpriced houses the price of which have been juiced up by the low interest rates and investors coming in and buying them as rather than just ordinary families. And a lot of those families, unfortunately, and I say this with huge regret, when they go to remortgage at sort of 6.5% rather than 2.5%, it's seriously going to impact their family finances. And, you know, some people may lose their homes. That's the reality here. When we talk about all these arcane concepts, there are real people behind these numbers, and the numbers hugely impact ordinary people, even though I totally understand more than anyone, perhaps, how difficult it is to get your head around this stuff if you don't ordinarily follow it.
Absolutely. Liam, look, thank you very much, as always. Liam Halligan there, our economics and business editor. Really breaking it down for you there, ladies and gentlemen. Right, well, coming up, why the British Medical Association is warning the NHS is at, quotes, breaking point and called for immediate government action. We are also going to be going to your views, GBViews at gbnews.uk. These big Pfizer revelations, they apparently did not do us the courtesy of testing whether or not their jab would stop transmission. Before, we were all told that we had to get it, sometimes get it twice, maybe get it 3 times, otherwise we're all evil, we'll kill grandma and won't be able to go on holiday. But first is your latest news.
Good afternoon, 3:35. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. The Prime Minister says she's absolutely sticking to her pledge not to cut public spending as she continued to defend her government's budget. Liz Truss fended off questions from the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, in a heated Prime Minister's questions this afternoon, her first time at the dispatch box since the Chancellor unveiled that mini-budget. Well, Sir Keir labelled Kwasi Kwarteng's plans as madness and said it had sent the economy into turmoil.
Who voted for this? Not homeowners paying an extra 500 extra on their mortgages. Who voted this? Not working people paying for tax cuts to the largest companies. Who voted for this? Not even most of the MPs behind her who know you can't pay for tax cuts on the never, never. Does she think the public will ever forgive the Conservative Party if they keep on defending this madness and go ahead with a kamikaze budget?
Well, the Prime Minister responded saying the budget's delivered security for families for the next 2 winters.
It's made sure that we're going to see higher economic growth, lower inflation and more opportunities. The way that we will get our country growing is through more jobs, more growth, more opportunities, not through higher taxes, higher spending and his friends in the union stopping hard-working people get to work.
The Bank of England's confirmed its emergency bond buying scheme, put in place to stabilise the markets, will close this Friday. Pension funds will need to find billions of pounds before the end of the week to make sure they can withstand market turmoil. The bank warned it will be challenging for some households to manage the projected rises in the cost of essentials alongside higher interest rates. Official figures show the UK's economy unexpectedly shrank by 0.3% in August. The ONS says the fall was because of a slowdown in manufacturing and in consumer-facing businesses like retail and hotels. Well, some of the fall was partially offset by stronger-than-usual summer performance from professional services. We're on your TV, online and your DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on whether or not John Venables, the evil man who murdered James Bulger, should be released from prison. Margaret says he should not be let out. He's had his chance to reform and ended up back behind bars twice. That's right, one of those times, actually, for having child abuse images on his laptop that were Category A, the very worst kind. Oh, not that there's any good kind, of course, but the very worst kind of child abuse images. Shocking stuff. Can this man really be reformed? In my opinion, no. Mark says people like this should stay behind bars forever. How would people feel if the person killed was one of their own family or friends? Well, they wouldn't let them out, would they, Mark? That's the point. They wouldn't let them out. And I want to know what you guys think about this as well. Of course, in no way whatsoever calling for any kind of vigilante justice, but should he be given another fake identity at our expense, at taxpayers' expense, to protect him from the public who presumably do not wish him well? We've got Adrian on. Adrian says he committed murder, a child murder, by the way, Adrian, murder of a toddler. He committed murder. He's a re-offending, dangerous man who must be kept in prison. Yes, I'm inclined to believe you and agree with you when it comes to that. GB Views, gbnews.uk. Right, we're moving on now to the NHS. Rather a lot to get stuck into with the NHS when it comes to our show today. We have been discussing, of course, the old COVID jab, whether or not people feel as though there was a bit of coercion in that. Do you feel it was the right thing to do, of course? Do you feel as though it protected you and others? We want to have a range of views here, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, the British Medical Association has warned that the NHS is on the brink of collapse. No, it is not the same headline that I read last year. It's not the same headline that we all read every single winter. But a poll revealed that more than 2 in 5 of the most senior hospital medics are planning to leave the NHS in the next year. The BMA is now calling for immediate government action after the survey suggests that roughly 8,000 consultants suggested pay and pension tax arrangements were some of the reasons why they plan to leave. Meanwhile, 9 in 10 consultants said this year's pay rise of 4.5% was inadequate or completely unacceptable. Are we at crisis point in the NHS, or do this lot need to shut up and get to work saving lives? Joining me on the show right now is Helen O'Connor, who's a former nurse and a GMB union spokesperson and former Health Secretary. Stephen Dorrell, thank you very much, both of you, for joining me. Helen, I will start with you. Is it not irresponsible towards patients, people who some of these medical professionals took the Hippocratic Oath to protect, if they now decide that they want to quit their jobs en masse?
Well, the BMA are absolutely correct. The NHS is in a state of collapse, and that's from years of restructuring, years of NHS trusts having to find cost efficiency savings, and years of attacks on the pay terms and conditions of doctors and nurses. And we have to be really clear, there is no NHS without skilled, experienced staff to provide the services to the patients. So things are in a pretty dire state. And what are nurses and doctors supposed to do? Are they supposed to carry on with everything collapsing around them? The fact is that things are in a really bad way now. The workloads are really high. It's the most experienced staff who are leaving the NHS, and that is a risk to patients. We have to be really clear about that. Pay terms and conditions are inextricably linked to patient care and patient safety. And if you have a health service where there's inexperienced staff who don't know what they're doing, that's a risk to patients. That's where patients will suffer harm. If there's not enough staff, they'll suffer neglect. So we have to be really, really clear here. We need a situation where the staff who deliver the service on the front line are paid and looked after properly, because good care will flow directly from that.
OK, so former Health Secretary Stephen Dorrell, apparently good care is directly linked to how much people are being paid.
No, it's not, in fairness, what Helen said. She said good care is related to it having a properly motivated and engaged workforce, which is clearly true. I think, if I may say so, there's quite a lot of grandstanding on all sides going on here. We shouldn't be surprised the BMA represents doctors. That's what they're paid to do. We shouldn't be surprised when the Royal College of Nursing represents nurses. That's what they're paid to do. What is undoubtedly true is that there is a shortage of skilled people to work, both in the health and social care system. The two are part and parcel of the same problem. And where I think we need to calm down a bit is to recognise that we will never deliver our objectives for either health or social care if we don't address the concerns of the people who work in those services.
OK, so Helen, I'll throw it back over to you. Is it a bit too easy for medical professionals to blame a lack of pay and government inadequacies? Because from where I'm sitting, I get emails every single day about this. Patients, potentially millions of patients, are very unhappy with what they would regard as a poor quality of care, and the negligence payouts from the NHS would appear to reinforce that as well. And that simply cannot all be. Please do not give me the usual line of "we're all so tired that we can't do a good job."
So you've got to think, look back. Yes, you've got to look back to how the situation has developed. And when I first started in the NHS, we did have good staffing. We did have safe services. People could get appointments with their GP. And then you're looking at years down the line, the impact, like I said, of constant and continuous restructuring to the front line, pay terms and conditions being driven down. And it's actually very, very difficult when you work in the NHS.
Sorry, just quickly on that one, it's just difficult for me to understand, because when you first started out, when you said there was adequate staffing and everything was rosy in the garden, the budget for the NHS was a lot less than it is now. So what is it, overpopulation?
No, what's happened over time is that services have been hollowed out. Services have been hollowed out. So there's been restructuring. Services have been moved, merged. We've lost something like half of the beds across the NHS over the last 30 years from cutbacks. And in the meantime, you've seen the conditions of staff not keeping, the pay of staff not keeping line with inflation. So things have been cut down. Things have been pared down to the bone. And right now we're in a position where a lot of staff are leaving, as the BMA have pointed out, and these are the most experienced doctors. Last year you had 40,000 skilled, experienced nurses leave the NHS as well. So you've got to think about the staff who are in the NHS now coping with all those vacancies, coping with stress, people going off with stress. So this situation has developed over a period of time. That's what I'm trying to say to you. And things were better before. I do remember when things were better before. You could get a face-to-face appointment with your GP, for example. Nowadays, you'll have people not even able to do that, or having to.
OK, I'm just gonna look back over Stephen, former Health Secretary Stephen Dorrell. Where are all these people going? Are they going to work in somebody else's healthcare service? Do you know?
Well, first of all, can I say that there's a tendency in the health service. I've been around the health service. I was first appointed a health minister in 1990, now over 30 years ago. And I was always told then that things used to be much better. I used to be told, actually, by a journalist friend of mine, that the health service was established on the 4th of July 1948, and on the 5th of July 1948, morale reached an all-time low. So this is a story that recurs. But having said all that, there's a serious issue here. healthcare delivery, health and care delivery, social care, including as well as the health service. I cannot overemphasize the importance of thinking of the two together, does rely on skilled, motivated, professional people. Slagging them off from public podiums doesn't help the issue. What we need to do is to address the issues that stand in the way of motivating them. It's undoubtedly true people are leaving the service. That is a problem for the management of the service as well as for the individuals. And we need to engage with them and with their representatives to address a real problem, but try to do it in a way, as I say, that avoids grandstanding and addresses the issues one by one.
Stephen, thank you very much. I hope you don't feel undervalued here, Stephen. I know I gave the first word to Helen, but I'm just going to give the last one as well, because we are a bit pressed for time. But, Helen, what other country's health service are all these medical professionals leaving to go and work in then?
So people are leaving. I mean, they're leaving for other jobs. I, for example, left in the end. And one of the reasons I left is because it was very demoralising for me as a nurse to not be able to get.
But what other country's health service are they leaving to? Because otherwise they just want to leave the profession, don't they? They don't want to leave our health service.
So they're leaving. My understanding is they're leaving completely.
You can, Stephen. Go on, Helen. You answer, and then I'll give the last word to Stephen. Then go on.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily that they're going off to work, and I mean, some are going to agencies because the agency pay and conditions are better, which is very, very expensive for the NHS actually, and we'd be far better off retaining our staff within the service and paying them properly rather than using agencies. So that's one example, and then some are leaving the profession completely. I mean, myself, I'm a typical example of that. So it's not necessarily the case that they're going to other countries. But I just want to make the point just really quickly. It's very demoralising when you're a healthcare professional and you cannot get services for patients, or patients are waiting a very long time for things, and that's driving people out as well. They can't deliver the care that they want to deliver.
I understand. Stephen, go on very quickly. I'm getting shouted at here.
I want to make a general point that you might put to Liam Halligan when he's next in your studio. We have now more vacancies than we have people available to work in our economy. The health service doesn't work in isolation. People have a choice. And if they can see better or more rewarding work outside healthcare delivery, that's where they go.
All right, both of you, thank you very, very much. Really enjoyed that. Helen O'Connor there, former nurse and a GMB union spokesperson, and former Health Secretary Stephen Dorrell. Great stuff. Right, we're going to have to rattle through this now, people. I've only gone and done it again, torn strips off the running order. Downing Street has indicated it's keeping an open mind when it comes to an extra bank holiday for the King's coronation. King Charles's ceremony will be held on Sunday, the 6th of May at Westminster Abbey. Be nice as bank holiday then, because it's the day after my mum's birthday. Anyway, Camilla, the Queen Consort, will be alongside the King and will also be crowned in the historic ceremony. It's going to be a very different coronation, though, OK? Less coronation, more Coronation Street, because they're going to do it on a budget, apparently. I personally want them to blow the bank for this, all right? I want to see gold carriages left, right and centre. I want to see the lot of it. This is, of course, a resplendent day in British history. I don't want the world to look at us and think we're doing it on the cheap. I'm joined now by BBC royal correspondent, former, no less, Michael Cole. Michael, thank you very much. I want a coronation, not Coronation Street.
Oh, Patrick, you're not going to be disappointed. There'll be no shortage of pageantry, pomp and circumstances. It'll be coming out of your ears. You'll be able to go down there and cheer. The British love a good parade, and they're certainly going to get it. Of course, it's going to be different. The last coronation, and bear in mind, there have been more solar eclipses in the last 200 years than there have been coronations. The last coronation, which I remember very well, being 10 years old at the time, on June the 2nd, 1953. That was the sort of last hurrah of the old British Empire. The Queen was then the Queen of 34 different realms. Well, today, Prince Charles, who is now King Charles III, is the monarch of 14 realms. So it's going to be very different. Somehow they managed to fit in the entirety of the British aristocracy. 8,000 people were inside the Abbey. I don't know how they did it. It'll be trimmed down to 2,000 this time. And there you see the new king and the Queen Consort. And that's something, of course, completely different, because she is going to be crowned sitting next to him. She's going to be anointed. She's going to be there in all her ceremonial robes. And whatever else they do, Patrick, they won't be cutting down on the ritual, the solemn ritual, the ancient ritual of coronation. Every jot and tittle and every last comma will be included in that service.
Good, because as well, you know, look, obviously I'm at this point now legally obliged to say you don't look old enough to remember the first coronation, so there you go. But you don't, and I certainly don't, and this could well be a once-in-a-lifetime thing for me or various different other people. We want to see it in its full, you know, pomp and glory. Look at what the Jubilee celebrations have done in a rather mawkish sense, but nonetheless, the Queen's funeral did help to unite the nation a bit as well, in my opinion. I don't want to give in to these rabid people who are going, oh, I can't afford to heat my house, so King Charles needs to get coronated in a straw hut. You know, come on, do it the proper way.
Yeah, interesting that you say all that, because we'd only just come out of austerity, Labour Party austerity in 1953. And one little feature, which I haven't seen mentioned elsewhere, is that the aristocrats who attended were all allowed to buy the actual seats they sat in and take them home with them. And I think they were about £25 each. And they did. They were rather tasteful in a powder blue colour. That was to offset the cost of the coronation. So these concerns are nothing new. But it will be a very splendid occasion. There'll be plenty of pomp, marching bands, pipers. There'll be contingents from Australia, New Zealand, the Anzacs, the Canadian Mounted Police. They'll all be there. What there won't be is perhaps the carriage parades. We will perhaps not see there was Queen Salotti of Tonga last time, and other potentates riding in their private carriages. And the parade, you know, went up Park Lane, it went along Oxford Street, down Regent Street, Lower Regent Street, round Trafalgar Square, down Northumberland Avenue, along the embankment into Parliament Square. It was absolutely huge, and it went on, and the ceremony itself lasted 3 hours. Well, this time it'll be about an hour, and if you compare it, the Queen's funeral was about an hour, and that was perhaps appropriate. It will be a splendid occasion. There'll be history, and I assure you, I did see it, because that coronation ushered in the television age. My mother and father bought a television set they couldn't afford, a 12-inch black and white set, and somehow 17 people sat in our back room in Wembley and watched it.
Oh, fantastic memories. And it's these kind of memories that I want to pass on for other people of my generation, people of the younger generations, children, frankly, just kids, right, who will be able to say in however many years' time, I watched this coronation. Wasn't it like nothing else I've ever seen? It was a fantastic ceremony. It was a fantastic show. Not, oh, gosh, they did that on the cheap. Thank you very much, Michael. Michael Cole there, the former BBC royal correspondent, who still does not look old enough to have remembered that very first coronation. There we go. Right, OK, loads to get stuck into. Lots of you been getting in touch with your thoughts on the NHS being on the brink of collapse. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Keep your views coming in as well on something we'll be discussing a little bit later on, the Pfizer revelations, as to whether or not you felt a bit coerced, whether or not you felt as though Pfizer should potentially have been a bit more upfront early doors about the fact that that vaccine had not been tested when it comes to transmissibility. OK? But for now, the NHS is always at breaking point. This is from Aaron. It's been a breaking point for the 28 years of me being alive. The biggest problem is that it's a massive money pit because they don't have any responsibility to provide the best service for patients. Well, actually, you see, you're wrong there, Aaron, because when service is not provided for patients, what they can say is they were too tired and too stressed. But there we go. Anyway, Liz says, the NHS has been on the verge of collapse since it was first set up. Until we have a root and branch reform of the NHS, nothing will change. Interesting, fascinating. I can't help but wonder as though maybe the quality of care would go up directly in terms of the amount that people who work in the NHS are paid. The only problem that I would have with that is you can Google how much every single role in the NHS pretty much is paid, right? So you know it going in with your eyes wide open. Trevor says, throwing money at the NHS has not worked for years. The NHS needs a good shake-up. Fire all the useless middle management and get back to basics. Yes, with a series of emails there, not a single one of them mentioned the diversity officers, but there we are. Coming up, turbulence. Turbulence on the benches as Prime Minister Liz Truss faces mounting pressure from MPs on her government's economic strategy, and as well as the parole board is preparing to decide whether to release one of the toddler James Bulger's killers. His mother writes to Prime Minister Liz Truss calling on her to block the hearing. I'm not surprised. I can't believe this is even a question. Lock the guy up, throw away the key. Stay with me, Patrick Christys, right here on GB News Live. Before that, see you weather.
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. The weather continues to chop and change. Most places will have a fine, bright day on Thursday, but in the far south it'll be quite misty and murky. and there will be more wet and windy weather to come in the northwest. Right now, we've got this weather front slowly coming across the country, but there are more gathering out in the Atlantic. This is bringing outbreaks of rain to parts of the Midlands, spreading into eastern England through this evening, and damp and drizzly conditions developing along the southernmost parts of England and Wales. Further north, brighter skies to end the day, but then clear skies overnight mean it will turn quite cold across Scotland and Northern Ireland, parts of northern England too, well down into single figures. So a touch of frost in the countryside with all the cloud and the misty, murky conditions in the south. Temperatures are likely to hold up for some in double digits. So a grey start for much of the southern parts of England and Wales on Thursday morning. A lot of cloud, misty, drizzly weather, and that is likely to continue along the south coast for most of the day. For many, any early mist and fog should clear away, and then it's dry and bright with sunny spells for northern England, North Wales, most of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but we will see some rain getting into north coast of Northern Ireland and northwest Scotland later on as the winds start to pick up here. Temperatures close to average for most places. Still a bit damp and drizzly through Thursday evening across the south. A bit more rain coming into parts of Scotland, one bound sinking south, another one following on behind as we head into Friday. And again, it's a messy picture for Friday. Further rain coming up from the south, further rain spreading in from the north. But between those zones of rain, there will again be some sunny spells for parts of eastern Scotland and northern England. More blustery showers coming into the far northwest. So it is chopping and changing quite a bit, the weather over the next couple of days. Temperatures, however, always remain around average, but feeling a little colder to end the week across the north. Bye for now.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
This is GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. Coming up, pressure is mounting on Liz Truss to get the UK's financial affairs in order. Now, we've seen a bit of market turmoil, haven't we, since the Chancellor's mini-budget last week. But how does this all impact us directly? Our business and economics guru will be breaking it down for you, OK, about the money in your pocket. Plus, the mother of murdered child James Bolger is fighting to keep one of his killers behind bars, and I'm not surprised. With reports that he's committed crimes whilst on parole, we'll be discussing just how and what our justice system should be doing with repeat offenders. Do they deserve a third or even a second chance? No, as far as I'm concerned. Plus, the date has been set now for the King's royal coronation. That's right, but this time perhaps not bigger and better, but scaled back to reflect hard-up times. Less coronation, more Coronation Street, and I'm not a fan of that. Do you want a less glamorous coronation? Get the gold out, that's what I say. We need a bit of sparkle in our lives. That and much, much more coming your way. But before that, it's your latest headlines.
Patrick, thank you, and good afternoon to you. The top story today, the Prime Minister says she's absolutely sticking to her pledge not to cut public spending as she continued to defend her government's budget. Liz Truss fended off questions from the Labour leader in a heated PMQs this afternoon. That's her first time at the dispatch box since the Chancellor unveiled his mini-budget. Sir Keir Starmer labelled Kwasi Kwarteng's plans as madness and said it had sent the economy into turmoil. He called on Ms Truss and the government to reverse what he called the kamikaze budget.
Who voted for this? Not homeowners paying an extra $500 extra on their mortgages. Who voted this? Not working people paying for tax cuts to the largest companies. Who voted for this? Not even most of the MPs behind her who know you can't pay for tax cuts on the never, never. Does she think the public will ever forgive the Conservative Party if they keep on defending this madness and go ahead with a kamikaze budget?
Well, that was Sir Keir Starmer. The Prime Minister responded saying the budget will keep families secure for the next 2 winters.
It's made sure that we're going to see higher economic growth, lower inflation and more opportunities. The way that we will get our country growing is through more jobs, more growth, more opportunities, not through higher taxes, higher spending and his friends in the union stopping hard-working people get to work.
Well, the Bank of England has confirmed today its emergency bond buying scheme will close this Friday. Pension funds will need to find billions of pounds before the end of the week to make sure they can withstand market turmoil. The bank had been forced to intervene amid the continuing fallout over the Chancellor's mini-budget. Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg says the Bank of England is in control of the tools to deal with inflation.
And the Bank of England must try and calculate what is the right pace to go for the UK economy. But you have to bear in mind that the way to stop inflation is through monetary policy. Everybody knows that. That is an interest rate tool that the Bank of England is in control of, and that is the mechanism that will be used to tackle inflation and already has been used.
Well, official figures show the UK's economy unexpectedly shrank by 0.3% in August. Experts had been expecting economic growth to flatline, not shrink. The Office for National Statistics says consumer-facing services like retail, hairdressers and hotels struggled, whilst there was a notable decrease in the manufacturing sector. Well, in news away from the economy, detectives looking for a woman who went missing 3 years ago have launched a murder inquiry after finding human remains. 19-year-old Leah Croucher was last seen on CCTV walking to work in Milton Keynes in February 2019. Thames Valley Police are searching a property where items belonging to her, including a rucksack, have been found following a tip-off from the public on Monday. And the police are saying specialist teams will remain at the property for a significant period of time. For the first time, the NHS has issued an amber alert over critically low levels of blood supplies. Non-urgent operations requiring blood could be postponed, as hospitals have been told to implement plans to protect stocks and prioritise supply. The NHS's overall supply of O-type blood, the universal type that can be given to just about anyone, has fallen to below 2 days. The shortages are thought to be due to ongoing staff issues. And in Ukraine, the brother of the mayor of Kyiv says Russia's president is deliberately targeting civilians. Yesterday, several areas of Ukraine, including the capital, Kyiv, were targeted by Russia, leaving at least 26 people dead and dozens more injured. Ukrainian former heavyweight boxing champion Vladimir Klitschko told GB News Vladimir Putin is targeting civilian infrastructure to make up for losses on his battlefield.
Russia, Putin in this case, is the leader of the country, trying to put us all on the knee. So we freeze, we have no food, and try to dictate what we actually want to do and how we're supposed to live. And that's the strategy and tactic of Russia in this case, because on the front line, they don't have success.
The UK's government's representative has told the Supreme Court that it's obvious the Scottish Parliament doesn't have the competence to legislate for another independence referendum. The court's been asked to decide if Scotland's Parliament has the legal authority to go ahead and hold a second vote, Indy Ref 2, despite opposition from the UK government. Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, intends to hold a vote next October. The two-day hearing ends today. That's it. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens. Now let's get back to Patrick Christys.
Yes, welcome back, everybody. Money, money, money again, as analysts are apparently warning that the pound could reach parity with the dollar after it fell sharply this morning, albeit briefly. It always seems to rise again, doesn't it? But there we go. Liz Truss faced MPs in the House of Commons earlier for a gruelling Prime Minister's questions, in which I must say I thought she performed rather well, actually. With the UK's spiralling economy as one of the main topics, the Prime Minister ruled out spending cuts, raising questions on how she plans to calm financial markets in coming weeks. But with the turbulent pound and pension funds reportedly falling into risk, it looks like the government has a big job on their hands. Well, a big job calls for a big guy, and that's right. It's time for our economics and business supremo, Liam Hannigan, with On the Money. Right, Liam, we spoke last hour. Let's jazz it up a little bit. Moggy, moggy, moggy. What's going on with...
Oi, oi, oi.
Yeah, there it is.
So Jacob Rees-Mogg is the business secretary these days. And some people felt that in his remarks this morning, he sort of attacked the Bank of England. What he actually said in response to journalists saying that the government's crashed the economy and caused this financial turbulence, he actually made a really solid point. The day before the mini-budget on the 23rd of September, on the 22nd of September, the Bank of England only raised interest rates by 0.5%, and the markets were expecting a 0.75% rise. The Federal Reserve in the US had raised by 0.75%, 3 months in a row. So that meant the dollar attracted more money, the dollar got stronger and the pound got weaker. And it was a completely relevant point that he made. It was taken as an attack. And then when he appeared here on GB News, he spoke to Gloria and Mark Longhurst before the show with you. He said he believes the Bank of England is independent. He's not telling the Bank of England what to do. He kind of reined in that idea that he'd been attacking the Bank of England, and rightly so, because the worst thing that we could have now, Patrick, when the world's financial markets analysts are looking at the UK economy, they seem to have alighted on the UK for now because they know there's a lot of political turmoil, a Prime Minister who's quite weak in terms of her own parliamentary party and so on. He knows, I think he's right, that if you start to get open warfare between the Bank of England and the Treasury, then speculators really will attack the pound. They really will attack our bond market. They really will push up borrowing costs because the sort of governance structure of the UK will start to look dysfunctional. So what Jacob Rees-Mogg has been doing this afternoon has been trying to quell that idea that he's having a proper go at the Bank of England.
Could I ask you, it might be a point in this, which is that actually it doesn't really suit the Labour Party or a lot of political opponents, or dare I say it, some of their opponents in the media, to have economic stability at the minute, because economic instability makes it more likely there's going to be a general election, makes it more likely that Liz Truss might be voted out, that the Tories might be voted out, etc. And I can't help but wonder, actually, exactly who is playing roulette with our economy at the minute when it comes to that. Could some forces potentially be deliberately stirring the chaos up in order to get what they want politically?
Yeah, I don't think, we should be surprised that Her Majesty's opposition is trying to, suggest that the government's caused chaos. That's what they do. That's why democracy is the worst possible system of government, except for all the other systems, as Churchill once said. I think Labour are being disingenuous when they say that Downing Street has crashed the economy, because I think what we're seeing on financial markets is the culmination of trends over many, many months, as you and I discussed yesterday and indeed in the last hour. I think the political and media class, a lot of ordinary people think this is a parlour game to them. A lot of us, we look sort of insulated from the real world. We don't really draw across the media from all sections of the population, socio-economically and politics as well. And so to a lot of people, it does look like we're having some kind of, parlour game with this, and it's just a sport for lots of us. It isn't a sport for me. It's a really serious thing. I think that there is a lot of financial insecurity out there, and I think it is irresponsible for politicians to try and deliberately stoke up fear, whether they're on the Tory backbenches and they voted for Rishi Sunak and they don't like Liz Truss, or they're on the opposition benches. And I think sometimes the public senses that, and I think the public is a lot more sophisticated than the political and media class think. And I think they see that. They see that people are playing games, and they take umbrage at that.
Especially in the particular economic climate that we've got at the minute. The last thing people want is for people to be playing games in the middle of a cost of living crisis.
Yeah, it's all very well for people to stand at the dispatch box and throw around totally, suggestions that the British economy is completely on its knees, and if you've got a pension, the pension's going to be taken away, and the economy is about to collapse. Meanwhile, an investment that was about to happen to create 1,000 jobs in a community that needs them doesn't happen. Meanwhile, a pensioner has serious mental health problems, unsurprisingly, because people on the telly are telling him or her that they're going to lose their income. So I'd like to see a lot more balance, a lot more responsibility, a lot more knowledge, actually, and even-handedness when we're reporting this financial turmoil. I like to think that's what you get here on GB News.
Absolutely, and that's why we're delighted to have you. Thank you very much, Liam. Liam Halligan there, our economics and business editor. Good stuff, that. Right, so we're moving away from the money side of things now and towards justice, because there are reports that the Justice Secretary is ready to block what he calls perverse release of James Bulger's killer, John Venables. So Brandon Lewis will meet with James's mother, Denise, who wrote Prime Minister Liz Truss in an attempt to block her son's killer from being granted parole. We all know the James Bulger case. Shocking stuff, sickening stuff, one of the most disgusting crimes that this country has ever seen, frankly. And Venables, who was one of those killers, has reoffended twice since being convicted of the toddler's murder in 1993. One of those times was for Category A child pornography, by the way. The parole board is preparing to decide whether to release Venables from prison. Absolutely unbelievable. I mean, for those repeat serious offenders who are actually released, should they be given new identities as well? This is the other kicker, right? Aside from the moral element of this, which is this guy kills a toddler, all right, he was a child himself, but then goes on to reoffend in a abhorrent and ridiculous way. You've got a child killer and a paedophile rolled into one, essentially, here. Both of those things are crimes where one may say that people should never actually be allowed to have the opportunity to rehabilitate, let alone get back out into the community. But anyway, should they ever be released in the first place? Should they be given a new identity if they are released for their own protection? Have they lost the right to protection, given the crimes that they've done? I'm joined now by former prison governor Ian Aitchison and by former prison inmate Ads Khan. Look, great to have you both on the show. Very, very controversial topic. There's a very difficult topic to talk about. Former prison governor Ian Aitchison, I will start with you. Let's just stick to the new identity element of it, really, I suppose. How do you feel about the idea that John Venables should be given, at the taxpayer's expense, a new identity if he's released?
Well, thanks for having me on, Patrick. And the first thing to say is that anybody with a shred of human empathy would feel for Denise Fergus and how she is repeatedly being traumatised by this horrific case. I'd prefer to talk about the harm, if I may, and can we get to the identity? Because the parole board haven't made a decision yet. And the decision that the parole board must make, which is then subject to new powers the Lord Chancellor will have on the release of the highest risk prisoners, should be based on harm. So if we look at the case of Venables, so he was imprisoned for an absolutely heinous crime, which had sexual and sadistic features to it. He's then sentenced to life, but he has a tariff. That means that's the custodial part that the offenders, both with him and Thompson, have to serve. Which is appealed in terms of its sentence, and it gets longer and then shorter. But in any case, they're released after about 8 years. But they're released on life licence, which means that they can effectively be recalled to custody. And as you've said at the start, Venables has been recalled twice in 2010 and 2017 for offences that are related to the possession of child abuse pornography. Now, there's been a lot of research done on the relationship between the possession of child abuse pornography and future offending. But what we know about Venables is that he has offended in the most heinous way before. So if you look at all of that in the round and you consider what the parole board will have to do in relation to this second, I believe, on this current sentence, application for parole, the first one was knocked back. And if you think about the precautionary principle that the Secretary of State for Justice says must be now employed in terms of making a release, I cannot see any circumstances at all meaningfully where this man should be released from prison.
All right, Ads, I'll bring you in now. This is Ads Khan. He's a former prison inmate. Ads, I've got to be honest with you, for a chap, John Venables, who's spent a heck of a lot of time in prison, given the nature of his crimes, I'm surprised he's still alive.
Well, yeah, so am I. I mean, I think, and that's where the identity or the protection of his identity actually works. Look, there are winners, there are losers, and there are people that have not discovered how to win. And these are some of the people that you find in prison, and these are some of the people that can be rehabilitated. However, in my opinion, child killers, child predators can't. And Venables is continuously displaying that he's a threat to children. So I'm not surprised that he's actually going for his parole hearing, because that will happen. But whether he gets it is another matter.
Stick with you, Ads, for now, if that's all right. I don't know if you had, a fair few mates or whatever who were in prison. You've obviously had some experience of the prison system, right? And presumably the parole system as well. Do you regularly look at people, perhaps not as serious as the John Venables case, but look at people and think, I don't know how on earth you've got parole?
At some stages, yeah, I do. I think, how on earth do you get parole? Even when I was in prison, I used to see that. And I used to think, how have they actually granted you parole? But with the Venables situation, look, everybody deserves a second chances. And obviously, when I say that, I don't believe in child predators.
Yeah, of course.
But at the same time, with Venables, in 2010, he got caught with 57 indecent images. He also posed as a 35-year-old female who's abused their 8-year-old child. And then in February, which he went to prison for, again, he was released. Then in February 2018, he also got caught with 1,000 images. Yeah. This behaviour, this pattern, it's just increasing time and time again. So in this situation, I don't even know if prison is the right thing for him. Surely a mental asylum will be, because we can't keep repeating him, because obviously jail isn't working for him, and we know that because of how he's actually displaying himself upon release.
You do raise a series of very good points there, Ads, and it brings me actually quite nicely, Ian, onto my next question, which is a bit unpalatable, OK, and his strong views on all sides here. When it comes to the sexual element of John Venables' crimes, could something like chemical castration be an option? Could something like the death penalty be an option? I don't know where you stand on this. Is that barbaric? I don't know. Some people keep suggesting this kind of stuff, right? Where do you stand on it?
Well, I'm not in favour of the state putting people to death, because I believe that the state demonstrates the superiority of our values over people who commit even the most disgusting crimes. One thing we need to be really clear about, that the psychiatrists at the original trial for the murder of James Bulger were quite clear that those two knew what they were doing. Okay, so I think there's no question of
which is
mental
worse in a way, isn't it?
disability. Yeah. This is deviance, and as has been said, the deviance seems to be accelerating. The possession of some of the worst forms of child abuse pornography that you can have seems to indicate that this is still a predatory and profoundly dangerous person who, must be protected from the public. Yeah. Now, Brandon Lewis, I think, has made a good start as Justice Secretary around other issues to do with managing dangerousness. So I'm quite hopeful that he will apply that precautionary principle, or use the powers that his predecessor, Dominic Raab, talked about to intervene and block the release of people that should be protected from the public, if it's the case that the parole board make that decision. We don't know yet whether the parole board will or not. I have to say also that the parole board are full of really decent people. I know some of them who absolutely have public protection at the forefront of their minds, but they sometimes make mistakes. And they made a horrendous mistake in relation to John Warboys, the taxi predator and killer. Yeah. So that's a reason for saying that in the case of these exceptionally dangerous people, maybe there needs to be another institution, I include terrorists in this as well, that takes those decisions out of the parole board's orbit, and we have a national service, much like Scotland has, that focuses on the risk of dangerous people.
Ads, I'll give the final word to you. How bad would a full life term be? I luckily so far have never seen the inside of a prison cell, so I don't really know. We saw it with Wayne Couzens, didn't we? Of course, he's been given a full life tariff. Because I think one of the things for James Bulger's mum is that she won't want him living in any comfort whatsoever.
And I can totally understand where she's coming from with that. Look, with the life sentence, yes, he'll be away from the people. He'll be away from children to start with. So obviously, whatever he's got going on in his mind against child, or the threat that he poses against child, will significantly be reduced. And in that situation, the one thing that gets me, and just to touch on what you said about the castration and what have you, I mean, I'm dead against obviously the death penalty, but look, it's no secret, right? I mean, I'm attracted to women, right? No matter what happens, okay, if I went to prison and then I did a sex offenders treatment program, which is called the SOTP course, and I think it runs over between 10 and 16 weeks, and they go through whatever they need to go through to actually help rehabilitate themselves. Now, if I did that course and I was then released, you're not going to change my mind. I'm not automatically going to now find men attractive. So if that's what you're possessed to be mentally, you're mentally sick, and I don't know how you're going to get around that without proper mental health. I mean, Broadmoor stages, as opposed to going to prison, because obviously prison's not working for him because he's reoffending time and time again, unfortunately.
Yeah, look, both of you, thank you very much. I thought that was really informative stuff, actually, from both of you there, and I'm sure our viewers and our listeners got a lot out of that. That's former prison governor Ian Aitchison and former prison inmate Az Khan. Get your views coming in on this. Emotive stuff. GBViews at gbnews.uk. If you are just joining us, it is that news that potentially, yes, OK, it might be quite unlikely. One would hope it is very unlikely. One would hope it was impossible, actually, but that John Venables, one of James Bulger's depraved, evil, sick, twisted killers, could be set for parole. This is, of course, after he's already been sent back to prison for child porn offences as well, and at the taxpayers' expense, presumably given a new identity. Lots to go stuck into there in terms of death penalty stuff, chemical castration, yep. Should he be given a new identity? Should he even be an option for parole? Loads and loads and loads to get stuck into. GBViews at gbnews.uk. This is, of course, GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys, and coming up, they are at it again. Police broke up a protest held by Insulate Britain earlier, good grief, which blocked off several lanes of traffic at Parliament Square ahead of PMQs. I'll be back in a tick.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, a court has heard allegations that a nurse smiled to parents of a premature baby girl after killing her at the 4th attempt. Lucy Letby is accused of the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 10 more at Countess of Chester Hospital in 2015 and 2016. She does deny all charges. GB News' North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper has the latest from the trial at Manchester Crown Court.
The prosecution continued their opening today at the Lucy Letby trial at Manchester Crown Court. Now, so far in this trial, on Monday, the jury was sworn in and they were given details around child A and child B in this case. Now, these two children were twins. Child A was allegedly murdered by Lucy Letby, whereas child B survived. Now, the prosecutor on Monday, Nick Johnson KC, told the jury that Lucy Letby was a constant malevolent presence at the Countess of Chester Hospital. Yesterday, the jury were then given details around child C through to child G in this case. They were also told to look for patterns emerging as they were given details around some of the methods that the prosecution alleged that Lucy Letby used to kill the babies. We heard about injections of air into the children's stomachs, milk or other fluids being injected via the nasogastric tube, even 2 instances of insulin poisoning, all while Lucy Letby was on shift. Now, today, the prosecution began with child H, who Letby allegedly attempted to murder on 2 occasions in September of 2015. They then moved on to child I, who they allege Letby tried to kill 4 times, but was successful on the 4th occasion. The jury also heard that Letby smiled at the mother of child I, despite her daughter having just died. The prosecutor then went on to describe what she was doing as persistent, calculated and cold-blooded. Now, Lucy Letby is a former nurse who's been accused of the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of a further 10 babies. She denies all of the charges against her.
Gosh, Sophie Reaper there outside Manchester Crown Court. We'll bring you all of the latest developments on that trial as and when we get them. Well, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on the NHS teetering on the edge. So GBViews at gbnews.uk. We are going to be doing a little bit later in the show something I know has got a lot of people very, very hot under the collar, this. OK, very hot under the collar. Lots of strong views on both sides. Now, it's been about the COVID vaccine. Now, the reason why I wanted to do it today, just quickly, was because I felt very, very, very impassioned to do this when I had a lot of thinking to do. Before I took the jab, I didn't particularly feel any massive compulsion to have it myself, OK? That's because I had COVID early doors, right? I was one of the lucky ones. It didn't particularly massively affect me. I knew that would give me some kind of natural immunity and I didn't really want the jab, right? That was my personal choice. I was then felt very pressured and coerced into taking it, a lot of media pressure. And the big thing that did it for me was the idea that if I didn't take it, I would be potentially killing others or, killing grandma or whatever the lines were at the time. And then it's emerged that Pfizer apparently have come out and said that actually they didn't test to see whether or not their vaccine did particularly stop transmission before they put it out onto market and before people were, in my view anyway, demonised and told, if you don't have it, then you are putting other lives at risk, playing roulette with other people's lives. OK, now that for me, I think, was quite shocking, a bit of a shocking revelation, and we're going to be having a debate on that in the next hour. Where are you on this? gbviews@gbnews.uk. I want those emails coming in thick and fast, OK? Make sure that you get in touch on all of that. Where do you feel? Did you feel coerced into taking it? Did you not feel coerced into taking it? Let me know. I want to get your views. Coming up, is Liz Truss's flagship trade deal with India at risk after her Home Secretary criticised migrants from the country? And should we sacrifice trade to shore up our borders? But first, your latest news headlines.
Thanks very much. The latest headlines this hour. The Prime Minister says she's absolutely sticking to her pledge not to cut public spending as she continues to defend her government's mini-budget. Liz Truss fended off questions from the Labour leader in her first PMQs since the Chancellor unveiled his plans for the economy. Sir Keir Starmer called Kwasi Kwarteng's plans madness and said it had sent the economy into turmoil.
Did this? Not working people paying for tax cuts to the largest companies. Who voted for this? Not even most of the MPs behind her who know you can't pay for tax cuts on the never, never. Does she think the public will ever forgive the Conservative Party if they keep on defending this madness and go ahead with a kamikaze budget?
Yeah. Well, the Prime Minister responded by saying the budget will keep families secure for the next 2 winters.
It's made sure that we're going to see higher economic growth, lower inflation and more opportunities. The way that we will get our country growing is through more jobs, more growth, more opportunities, not through higher taxes, higher spending and his friends in the union stopping hard-working people get to work.
Well, the Bank of England says its emergency bond buying scheme put in place to stabilise the markets after the Chancellor's mini-budget will close this Friday. Pension funds will need to find billions of pounds by then to make sure they can withstand market turmoil. The bank has warned of challenges for some households in dealing with the projected rise in the cost of essentials alongside higher interest rates. Official figures show the UK's economy unexpectedly shrank by 0.3% in August. The Office for National Statistics says the fall was because of a slowdown in manufacturing and with customer-facing businesses like retail, hairdressers and hotels struggling. Some of the fall was partly offset by a stronger than usual summer performance in the professional services sector. Those are your latest news headlines. You're up to date on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're with GB News. We're back in just a tick.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back, people. Now, Liz Truss's flagship trade deal with India is reportedly on the rocks after Indian ministers reacted angrily to Suella Braverman criticising migrants from their country. Well, she didn't really criticise them, but anyway. The Home Secretary expressed her reservations about the trade deal last week, as she said that it would increase migration to the UK and that Indians represented the largest group of visa overstayers. So it's not migrants, it's visa overstayers that she was criticising. But the Indian government sources said that the relationship has taken a step back following Braverman's statements. Joining me now is the CEO of Competair and international trade advisor Ishankar Singham, who's recently released a report on the free trade agreement between India and the UK. First things first, how damaging would it be to both India and the UK if a trade deal between the two countries was binned off because our actual Home Secretary criticised people who outstay their visa?
Well, I think there is a possibility that the UK and India could actually do a comprehensive free trade agreement, and lots of countries have been trying to do this. The US and the EU have tried for decades to get a comprehensive deal with India. The deal that Australia and the UAE did with India is quite superficial. So I think there is actually quite a lot at stake here, and the benefits to UK financial services firms, legal services firms. You know, we have a big issue with Scotch whisky taxes and tariffs in India. So there's quite a lot that we could get from this deal, but I think the Home Secretary's comments were need to be understood in the context of what you're talking about with the trade deal is not immigration per se. It's not sort of what most people think about when they think about immigration. It's about what's called Mode 4 services, which is movement of business people to, so somebody wants to go and visit their factory in the UK and they want to come for 2 weeks to visit and then go back. It's that kind of thing more so. There's some issues around. She was talking about people who overstay. She's talking about people who overstay, right? So is illegal. So that is illegal anyway, and the Indians do have an obligation to take back those people who are illegally in the UK, and that agreement is a separate agreement that the Indians need to keep their side of the bargain on that. So on the trade side, it's just things like mobility for these temporary business workers and some student visas and so on. But the Indians will certainly have to accept the people who have overstayed, who need to be returned to India, and that will be part of the overall the overall bargain and the overall package here.
Is it not a bit embarrassing for India, the way that I see it anyway, which is that they've thrown their toys out the pram because our Home Secretary, whose job it is to secure our country, has just come out and stated a fact, which is that, she's privy to the facts. I've not really got them to hand. She's the Home Secretary, of course, but one would assume that she's telling the truth when she says the largest group of overstayers are from India, right? I mean, realistically, isn't it a bit pathetic for the Indian government to potentially biff an entire trade deal because our Home Secretary says, shock horror, I'm not in favour of people overstaying their visa?
Yeah, and it's important to understand what she didn't say. She didn't say that she was going to stand in the way of Mode 4 services, temporary movement, temporary business permits, that kind of thing. She didn't say she was going to stand in the way of student visas. She focused her comments on, as you say, on the overstayers and the people who are here illegally. And India knows that they have to move on that issue. There's a number of other issues that India has to move on in order for a trade deal to be done as well. And what you always see as you get closer to the end of a negotiation is a lot of posturing from governments and excuses. So you could get, an excuse raised about this that's actually covering a different issue. So, for example, it's absolutely critical to the UK that India doesn't have rules that require you, if you're engaged in any type of e-commerce, to localize your data in an Indian server, for example. That will be an absolute red line, I think, for the UK. And that's a big issue for India. So they may be hiding other issues under the sort of purported anger about this one. But she was clearer in what she said than some of the media have reported in sort of general immigration terms.
Who needs who more when it comes to a trade deal between India and the UK?
Well, I mean, we will both benefit significantly from it. I mean, India's now become the 5th biggest economy in the world. The UK has gone past the UK in that respect. India is also... India is at a time of choosing. It needs to make a decision about which side of the table it's going to be on in terms of liberal economic democracies. They buy a lot of weapons from the Russians. They have a relationship with Russia. They're going to have to make some choices there. And this is part of it. So it's very important geopolitically for India to do a deal with the UK. It puts them firmly on one side of the ledger. And India is also very significantly affected by China and by distortions and barriers in China, and this deal would help them. It would help the supply chains orient in such a way that benefited both India and the UK. So there's a lot that India would gain from this, and I think also they would gain the fact that they've been able to do a deal with a major G7.
Indeed, this is it. But also one of the things that I think was a little bit understated when it came to voting for Brexit, and one of the reasons why I have been very strong about the idea that I don't think Brexit was a racist vote, was the idea that it might mean, well, supposedly anyway, less immigration from the European Union, possibly, and more immigration from places like India. I mean, as far as I can tell, we already have a pretty good immigration set up with India. There seems to be a large Indian community in pretty much every major town and city in the UK, and seems to be pretty good stuff when it comes to all of that thing. So I can't really understand why India would get on their high horse about this particular comment, which is that Suella Braverman is a bit miffed about... Well, it's not even that miffed. She just made a comment about the amount of people, the highest proportion of people who they have overstaying a visa,
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think some of the reporting of this has been rather feverish, and I think that there are some people who obviously want to see that this deal doesn't go through, and have sort of fomented some of these arguments. I think when the Indians sort of sit down in the cold light of day and realise that they need to make a significant offer on returns, and that a trade deal is open to them, I think we'll see a bit more rationality. But your reference to sort of the actual facts is important, and in terms of the actual immigration or the actual movement of people, it's going to be, as I say, a lot of business people coming back and forth. On the student visa.
Oh, well, that was Shankar Singham there. Unfortunately, we lost him at the end, but we were wrapping up anyway. CEO of Competare and International Trade Advisor. What do you make of that? I don't think we can live in a country, really, frankly, where our trade deals are based on whether or not we should be very, very lax when it comes to illegal immigration, frankly. I don't really think that's a pretty good deal at all. I would say no deal to that, but GBviews at gbnews.uk, get them coming in. Moving on. More protests on the streets of London today as police were called to break up a protest held by Insulate Britain, sorry, I always get that wrong, which blocked off several lanes of traffic at Parliament Square. Some of the campaigners glued themselves to the road close to House of Parliament ahead of Prime Minister's question time. There we go. Meanwhile, activists from Just Stop Oil blocked the back entrance to Downing Street in the group's 12th consecutive day of protests. They're calling on the government to stop all new oil and gas licences. I can't help but wonder why we bother ungluing some of these people, but there we go. GBnews' reporter Alice Porter has sent this report to us from Westminster.
Environmental protesters from Insulate Britain and Just Stop Oil caused absolute chaos in the centre of London today. We had about 21 protesters from Insulate Britain who had glued themselves to the road at Parliament Square. And it was at about 2 o'clock this afternoon that the final protester was unglued from the road and was arrested, and that was an 80-year-old woman. Whilst there were Insulate Britain protests happening in Parliament Square, Just Stop Oil had also done protests outside Downing Street at the back entrance. Now, this sort of was very much a coordinated protest to time with PMQs, with Liz Truss speaking. And some of the protesters I was speaking to said it felt very strongly that they wanted to get their message through to the government. Just Stop Oil are in their 12th day of protesting in the centre of London and say that this action will continue until November. Both groups have slightly different environmental aims, but both are causing severe disruption in London. Just Stop Oil yesterday were protesting in West London, and that led to 28 arrests. The Metropolitan Police say hundreds of arrests have taken place over the 10 days from different environmental groups. And for many of the people around London trying to get about their day, trying to operate their businesses, all the protesters are making that very difficult.
I'm sure none of us want to live in a country where we just left them there, glued to the pavement until they were on the brink of starvation, then made them sign a document that said they'd never do it again. That would be preposterous. Moving on, King Charles's coronation could be marked with a bank holiday, as Downing Street says that all options are being considered. There's been calls for a bank holiday to mark the historic occasion, which will take place on Saturday the 6th of May at Westminster Abbey. Camilla, the Queen Consort, will also be crowned alongside the King. It's expected to be a very different coronation, though, to the late Queen's in 1953, mainly because that was in 1953, which was around 3 hours long and full of pageantry. This time round, though, the ceremony is set to be shorter, importantly more diverse as well, and with a much smaller guest list. Right, well, joining me now is royal commentator Caroline Aston. Caroline, thank you very much. Yes, I believe you are there. Yeah, there we go. Caroline, so this coronation is...
Hello.
Hello. This coronation is going to be very, very different, as I understand it. Please tell me that we're going to get all the pomp and ceremony and true British stuff. I don't want a cost of living coronation.
Well, I would say it's going to be quality, if not quantity. There'll be plenty of robes and regalia. There'll be all the standard parts of a coronation service: anointing with oil, coronation oath, blessing, consecration. All of those are very important parts of this. And of course, it's part of a 80,000-year-old tradition, really. So it will be splendid and stunning. And I think the country seems to be split into three parts, really. Those who couldn't care less say that King Charles is King Charles anyway. Why do we have to spend any money at all? Those who want the works, the fanfares, the pomp, the pageantry, the robes, the lot. And those who perhaps see that here we have a man who'll be 74 on the day, and maybe there are stamina issues here. Is he really up for 3 hours of sitting on a rather hard chair, etc., etc.? Myself, I think what you'll see will be a coronation service for modern times that will glitter brightly, but yes, be toned down a little, because if King Charles is aware of anything, he knows that this is taking place against a backdrop of economic difficulty and doesn't want to be out of kilter with the times that he's in. I would just say that the coronation we're seeing the images of, Queen Elizabeth II's, cost knocking on the door of about £2 million back in 1953. That's getting on towards £47 million in today's money.
And even though we're in a cost of living crisis now, on average, people have more money than they did in 1953. And I think it takes a particularly sad, miserable person to sit there watching the television going, oh, he's arrived in a gold carriage and I've got to shop in the reduced aisle at Lidl. Yes, he is the king, right? He's the king. It would be weird if he rocked up and lived in a terraced house and drove a Skoda to his own coronation, wouldn't it, as far as I can tell? Do you not think, really, do you think the average man and woman really cares? Is this a classic case of people being offended on other people's behalves and going, oh, we better tone it down? I want to see the pomp and ceremony. No. People are forcing me to miss out on a good TV show.
Look, you are going to see pomp, you are going to see ceremony, but perhaps not quite so much of it. Not so much archaic ritual, slightly more modern language, something that recognises the changes in the structure of society that have gone on in the past 70 years. There will be plenty to watch. Gazillions will tune in to see it and to hear it. It will be a boost for tourism. And I like to think of it as well. A fine perfume has wonderful ingredients, expensive things distilled down to an essence. And maybe that's what we're getting here. The essence, the flavour of the 3-hour event 70 years ago made, how shall we say, suitable for today's taste. Nobody's really grousing about it. They just were so on fire, if you like, at the time of the state funeral, at the perfection of the pomp and the pageantry. They want more of it. After all, who doesn't like a bit of a do when times are dark?
I agree. I absolutely agree. I think capturing the mood of the nation, we need a bit of a lift. Although, obviously, they've got to cut down the guest list, which tragically means that Harry and Meghan won't be there.
I know. I'm absolutely gutted.
Will they actually be there? I don't know.
Who knows? Who knows who'll be on the guest list? If they're invited, will they come? They do have a bit of a history, you know, of turning down important invitations.
They do. They do indeed. They do indeed. Look, Caroline, thank you very, very much. Great to chat to you. And fingers crossed, we've both kept the ceremony that we want. Caroline Aston, a royal commentator. What do you make of this, people? Maybe I'm wrong. Let me know. Do you think they should do something reflecting the cost of living crisis? I don't know. What is it? They don't put the heating on in Westminster Abbey or whatever, and King Charles just puts another layer on. I'm not sure how you replicate it. It's a coronation, right? It's supposed to be one of the biggest events in our national history. And to be fair, it's been a fair few years since we had the last one, but whatever. Anyway, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts about the story now, about the possible parole hearing for James Bulger's killer. This is John Venables. He's been allowed out before. He's been sent back to prison again for child porn offences. This is, of course, after the depraved and disgusting murder of little James Bulger. Daryl says, Patrick, I remember the day this happened and the search and his poor mum on TV appealing for his return. Then all we heard was that 2 boys had taken him, throw away the keys for the pair of them. This is Daryl's view. We will never forget about it, and we shouldn't be even having this conversation. Darryl, I'm with you, we shouldn't be having this conversation. Fingers crossed the parole board do the right thing. They don't always get it right. John War Boys, they didn't get that right, and then they had to be pressured back into it. And I just think that maybe, if the parole board were forced, in some cases, to live with the person that they are proposing to release for a year, would that change their minds on when they release this person? You know, we see it a lot, don't we, with terrorists. I'm sorry, but, you know, I feel incredibly sorry for the person who has to live next door to someone who's convicted for terror offences. I wouldn't want to sit next to them on the tube. They could move in next to your parents, next to your grandma, next to your loved ones. I wouldn't fancy that. Do they live near the parole board, do they? I'm not sure that they do, but GBViews, GBNews.uk. Another view, Barbara. Not everyone should be given a second chance. He's been given a second chance, Barbara. Anyway, some people have psychopathic brains and feel no remorse and have no conscience. This has been proved. No parole. Strong stuff from Barbara. I mean, how many chances does this guy have to give? And the taxpayer as well for fake identities. Again, if someone commits a crime that is so heinous that if they walked outside prison and everyone knew who they were, presumably they'd get, I don't know, ripped limb from limb. The question is, should they be allowed back out at all? Really? Mel says, no parole, ever. Murders and repeat offenders do not change. No release, ever. It's not just the murder, though, Mel, is it? It's the sadistic sexual elements to this particular chap as well, and the repeat offences of that. And that in itself is another thing where there are big question marks over rehabilitation. It opens up, though, doesn't it, a discussion that we're going to be having very, very shortly, which is about the death penalty. Are there some crimes that warrant bringing back the death penalty? It's a controversial topic, but we're going to be talking about it nonetheless. Tabitha says, what do these despicable creatures have to do to warrant a whole life tariff? I know. How are these decisions made to release, and who are the people who decide that one murder isn't quite as bad as another? There's loads more coming your way because we've still got 1 more hour left for you here on GB News Live, and it's going to be an absolutely bumper hour as well. We are going to be discussing about this particular topic, the potential release of John Venables, who could be out and about. How do you feel about that? Should we bring back the death penalty for cases such as this? Should child murderers ever see the light of day again? And we are having our big COVID vaccine discussion. I've gone on record and said that I actually now, personally for me, the main reason I got the jab was to protect other people, not for myself. And if that reason was not even being looked into by Pfizer, who allegedly anyway was saying that they had not tested the transmission, whether or not this particular vaccine stopped transmission of the virus before they actually released it to the market, that could have led to people's civil liberties being curtailed, etc. Make sure you get your jabs and get another jab and get another one after that so that you don't kill grandma. We all remember that stuff, don't we? Well, hang on a minute. If we were not told the full truth about that, I personally feel very, very manipulated and let down. I'll be talking about all of that. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Make sure that you stay tuned. I'll be back in a tick.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update. The weather continues to chop and change. Most places will have a fine, bright day on Thursday, but in the far south it'll be quite misty and murky. and there will be more wet and windy weather to come in the northwest. Right now, we've got this weather front slowly coming across the country, but there are more gathering out in the Atlantic. This is bringing outbreaks of rain to parts of the Midlands, spreading into eastern England through this evening, and damp and drizzly conditions developing along the southernmost parts of England and Wales. Further north, brighter skies to end the day, but then clear skies overnight mean it will turn quite cold across Scotland and Northern Ireland, parts of northern England too, well down into single figures. So a touch of frost in the countryside with all the cloud and the misty, murky conditions in the south. Temperatures are likely to hold up for some in double digits. So a grey start for much of the southern parts of England and Wales on Thursday morning. A lot of cloud, misty, drizzly weather, and that is likely to continue along the south coast for most of the day. For many, any early mist and fog should clear away, and then it's dry and bright with sunny spells for northern England, North Wales, most of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but we will see some rain getting into north coast of Northern Ireland and northwest Scotland later on as the winds start to pick up here. Temperatures close to average for most places. Still a bit damp and drizzly through Thursday evening across the south. A bit more rain coming into parts of Scotland, one bound sinking south, another one following on behind as we head into Friday. And again, it's a messy picture for Friday. Further rain coming up from the south, further rain spreading in from the north. But between those zones of rain, there will again be some sunny spells for parts of eastern Scotland and northern England. More blustery showers coming into the far northwest. So it is chopping and changing quite a bit, the weather over the next couple of days. Temperatures, however, always remain around average, but feeling a little colder to end the week across the north. Bye for now.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
This is GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. Coming up this hour, the Prime Minister has faced tough questions in the House of Commons. I think she dealt with them rather well, though. She was put under pressure to get the UK's financial affairs in order. We're going to have analysis and reaction to what she said, and also breaking it down so you understand the pounds in your pocket with our economic guru, Liam Halligan. Plus, the mother of murdered child James Bulger is fighting to keep one of his killers behind bars, and with reports that he's committed crimes whilst on parole, in fact not just reports, the fact that he actually did, we'll be discussing just how and what our justice system should be doing with repeat offenders, certainly when it comes to child murderers and sex offenders as well. Do they deserve a second chance? Should we lock them up and throw away the key? Should we bring back the death penalty? And did you feel forced into getting the COVID vaccine? I've been talking about this throughout the show, and we're going to have our big debate on this right now. I certainly did feel quite coerced into getting it. How did you feel? It's emerged now that Pfizer didn't test whether or not their vaccine stopped you transmitting COVID on to others. Now, whether or not this meant that you got it just for yourself, fair enough, but was one of the main reasons behind you getting it the fact that you didn't want to transmit it onto other people? Were you concerned that if you didn't get it, you were somewhat evil? Do you think there was a lot of societal pressure? Actually, was that justified? Does that change your mind about getting any further shots? Or otherwise, of course, a range of views here. GBViews at GBNews.uk. Get in touch with that. But I, for one, am very angry about the whole thing. That and much, much more coming your way. But now it's the latest news.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon to you, or evening, I suppose, 5 o'clock. Our top story today. The Prime Minister says she's absolutely sticking to her pledge not to cut public spending as she continues to defend her government's economic plan. Liz Truss fended off questions from the Labour leader at her first PMQ since the Chancellor unveiled his mini-budget. Sir Keir Starmer labelled Kwasi Kwarteng's plans as madness and said it had sent the economy into turmoil. He called on the government to reverse what he called the kamikaze budget.
Who voted this? Not working people paying for tax cuts to the largest companies. Who voted for this? Not even most of the MPs behind her who know you can't pay for tax cuts on the never, never. Does she think the public will ever forgive the Conservative Party if they keep on defending this madness and go ahead with a kamikaze budget? Yeah.
Well, the Prime Minister responded, saying the budget will keep families secure for the next 2 winters.
It's made sure that we're going to see higher economic growth, lower inflation and more opportunities. The way that we will get our country growing is through more jobs, more growth, more opportunities, not through higher taxes, higher spending and his friends in the union stopping hard-working people get to work.
Well, the Bank of England has confirmed its emergency bond buying scheme will close this Friday. Pension funds will need to find billions of pounds before the end of the week, therefore, to make sure they can withstand market turmoil. The bank had been forced to intervene amid the continuing fallout over the Chancellor's mini-budget. The Business Secretary, Jacob Rees-Mogg, says the Bank of England can effectively deal with inflation.
And the Bank of England must try and calculate what is the right pace to go for the UK economy. But you have to bear in mind that the way to stop inflation is through monetary policy. Everybody knows that. That is an interest rate tool that the Bank of England is in control of, and that is the mechanism that will be used to tackle inflation and already has been used.
Well, official figures show the UK's economy unexpectedly shrank by 0.3% in August. Experts had been predicting economic growth to flatline. The Office for National Statistics says consumer-facing services like retail, hairdressers and hotels struggled, whilst there was notable decrease in the manufacturing sector. 115,000 Royal Mail workers will strike tomorrow on what will be the 6th day of action in recent months. The Communication Workers Union says its members across the UK will walk out amid ongoing disputes over pay and conditions. It's accusing the Royal Mail of planning structural changes which would put employees' jobs at risk. It's the first of a series of walkouts planned for the coming weeks in a year that's seen action from several industries. Detectives looking for a woman who went missing 3 years ago have launched a murder inquiry after finding human remains. 19-year-old Leah Croucher was last seen on CCTV walking to work in Milton Keynes in February 2019. Thames Valley Police are searching a property where items belonging to Leah, including a rucksack, have been found following a tip-off from the public on Monday. It says specialist teams will remain at the property for a significant period of time. In Ukraine, the brother of the mayor of Kyiv says Russia's president is deliberately targeting civilians. Yesterday, several areas of Ukraine, including the capital Kyiv, were targeted by Russian airstrikes, leaving at least 26 people dead and dozens more injured. Ukrainian former heavyweight boxing champion Vladimir Klitschko told GB News President Putin is targeting civilian infrastructure to make up for his military losses on the battlefield.
Russia, Putin in this case, is the leader of the country,
trying to put us all on a knee. So we freeze, we have no food, and try to dictate what we actually want to do and how we're supposed to live. And that's the strategy and tactic of Russia in this case, because on the front line, they don't have success.
The UK government's representative has told the Supreme Court that the Scottish Parliament doesn't have the competence to legislate for another Scottish independence referendum. The court's been asked to decide if Scotland's Parliament has the legal authority to go ahead and hold a second vote despite opposition from the UK government. Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has said she intends to hold a vote next October. The two-day hearing ends today. That's it with GB News, the People's Channel. More news as it happens. Now back to Patrick Christys.
Welcome back, people. We've got an action-packed final hour coming your way, jammed full of loads of the top talking points for you. We're going to be discussing whether or not child killers should ever see the light of day. We're also going to be asking whether or not you regret getting the COVID vaccine, given what we now know from Pfizer. But before that, the International Monetary Fund is calling on the government to balance the books, meaning that the Prime Minister might be boosted to cut spending or raise taxes. But when faced with MPs in the House of Commons earlier, Truss ruled out spending cuts, raising questions on how she plans to calm financial markets in coming weeks. But what does all of this mean for us? Should we start getting concerned about our bank accounts? Joining me to cut through the noise yet again is our economics and business editor, the hardest working economics and business editor in TV. It's Liam Halligan with On the Money. Go home.
Patrick, shucks. What can I say? That's a great word, shucks.
Shucks, it is. Shucks. Yes, you've got to make sure you get that right. Right, OK. Right, what's going on? Come on, talk to me. How bad is it?
Well, it's been a mixed day. We've had some numbers from the Office for National Statistics suggesting, not showing, suggesting that the economy is contracting. On the other hand, they're preliminary monthly numbers, which are always revised and revised again. And meanwhile, the International Monetary Fund is saying that we're going to be the fastest expanding economy in the G7, the big industrialised countries across 2022 as a whole. We were meant to be in the middle of a sort of post-COVID bounce back at this point.
Yes.
But the whole world isn't, because the whole world has been hit, and it is the whole world, by this reversal of the global interest rate cycle, a long-term increase in interest rates that we've seen from the beginning of this year. Mortgage rates have been going up steadily since the beginning of this year. But we have to acknowledge this. Since the mini budget, they've gone up a little bit sharper, not least because financial markets have been spooked about the ability of the government to balance the books.
Well, the IMF, who we just mentioned there, yesterday, you and I were talking about the fact that they predicted we might have the highest growth of any G7 nation.
3.6% compared to 1.5% in Germany.
So why haven't we got more... Well, not necessarily you and I, but why haven't more people got more confidence in Britain and the economy?
Because when you see the pound falling and you see what we call the 10-year gilt market, that's where the government sells its debt, spiking the amount of money that the government has to pay in interest, that's called the yield, that's spiking, it's alarming. It produces, understandably, pretty blood-curdling headlines. But we have to put this in context. You know, interest rates are going up around the world. Governments around the world pretty much are paying more for their borrowing because interest rates are going up. We're moving away from a really strange period in economic history when interest rates have been ultra low, as they have been since the global financial crisis. Patrick, what we call real interest rates, which is interest rates accounting for inflation, are still deeply negative. The interest rate is a lot less than the rate of inflation. So in some senses, people are still being paid, you know, to borrow money. It's still a weird, topsy-turvy world. We haven't yet really escaped from that global financial crisis of 2008-9, and what we're seeing now is the start of an adjustment which could get quite hairy.
I'm a bit concerned that we're in some kind of death spiral where everyone in the public sector wants their wages to go up in line with inflation. If that doesn't happen, then they'll go on strike, and that would have a knock-on effect anyway. People want a cap on their energy bills. People want the food prices to go down. So one way out of that might be to go for growth, but we can't possibly do that because that might mean tax cuts for the rich. I mean, why do we get out of this?
It's really difficult. You need statesmanship, you need leadership, you need, you know, balanced journalism. You need to not sort of, say that we're all going to hell in a handcart when actually we're not. This is still a strong economy. We still have tremendous companies here. We have tremendous entrepreneurs and commercial acumen in general. A lot of the world still wants to come and live in the UK, a subject that I know you cover a lot, and we've got to get this in perspective. Yes, if you've bought a house and you've mortgaged at 1.5% or 2%, understandably, and you have to remortgage in a couple of years' time when your fix comes to the end at 5.5% or 6%, it's going to really hurt. You may need to sell and buy a smaller house. You may need your family to help you if you're lucky enough to have relatives who can help you. There will be economic adjustment because we're moving away from those ultra-low interest rates and mass money printing that could never be sustained. Some of us have been warning that this would happen for many, many years, but we were ignored. The Bank of England, I think, has ignored this problem, and certainly politicians for many, many years. But now it's coming home to roost, and it's vital that people like you and me explain to the public what's going on, why it's happening, rather than just endless political blame-gamery and finger-pointing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just a bit sick and tired now. And it loses impact anyway from a journalistic perspective. The headlines about crisis, doom, this, that and the other. Are people reading that every single day? And the sun keeps rising every single day. They start thinking, what's the point?
30-odd million people in the UK are still going to work every day and getting paid, for the most part, pretty decent wages. Of course, for a lot of particularly private sector workers, wages haven't kept up with inflation. Public sector workers now get, on average, a higher wage than private sector workers, something you don't often hear on television, but it's true. And there will be people who own businesses, big and small, from, international conglomerates through to chip shops and laundrettes, who are worried about having to, make payroll, worried about business rates, worried about corporation tax. But we go on. We go on. This is still a really strong economy. And I think as long as the government and the Bank of England don't have a major falling out, little signs that that's happening, then I think the financial markets, for the most part, will remain stable.
All right, good stuff. Liam, thank you very much, as ever. Liam Halligan, our economics and business guru, editor, supremo, whatever you want to call him. He's got the lot of it. Right, OK, we're moving on from that now, because there are reports that the Justice Secretary is ready to block what he calls a perverse release of James Bulger's killer, John Venables, one of his killers anyway. Brandon Lewis will meet James's mother, Denise, who wrote to Prime Minister Liz Truss in an attempt to block her son's killer from being granted parole. There's a lot to this particular story, OK, because Venables has actually reoffended twice since being convicted of the 2-year-old's murder in 1993. The parole board is preparing to decide whether to release Venables from prison. A bit of context, again, about some of his reoffending there. It's child porn related, so you've got the fact that he's not only a child murderer, also clearly has some kind of weird sexual fascination with children as well. He's committed those crimes whilst on parole, so he must have known that people were looking at his computer, seemingly didn't particularly care as well. Taxpayers' expense for a new identity potentially every single time. It's got a lot to it, this, people, and a lot of you have been getting in touch, GBViews at gbnews.uk, throughout on that. We'll go to those shortly, but to discuss this now, it's my pleasure to be joined by former Scotland Yard Detective Peter Blexley. Peter, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
I also believe I've got criminal barrister Chris Dorr as well, I believe, down the line, I think. Chris will emerge at some point. There we go, both of you. OK, right, so, Peter, I'll start with you. I'm getting a lot of emails from people in here saying this chap can never be rehabilitated. If he's allowed out on the streets, there'll be riots.
Utterly understandable sentiments. Completely understandable. Because what do we know about Venables? Proven to be dangerous, proven to be deviant. Well, parole board, would you like to set him free? Do you want to put him out on the streets to potentially offend again?
It's shocking stuff, isn't it? And Chris, criminal barrister Chris Dorr, this is unbelievable as far as I can see, not just because of, but I can't believe I'm about to say this phrase, not just because of the initial murder of a toddler, right, but then the subsequent child porn offences as well. This guy should never see the light of day again, should he? Oh, I think you're on mute, Chris. Sorry, Chris, you're on mute, I'm afraid. Yeah, there he is.
Sorry about that. What I was saying
Right,
was whether he should be released or whether he should see the light of day, as you call it, it depends entirely on whether he remains a danger to the public, which is exactly what the parole board are there to decide. If the parole board they'll consider everything. They'll consider, of course, the original offence committed when he was only 10 years old, and they'll consider the child sex, pornography offences for which he's subsequently been recalled and arrested and even sentenced. And they'll consider, probably alongside all of that, they'll consider psychological, psychiatric assessments, his prison records and his behaviour in prison, and they'll make an overall assessment as to whether he remains a risk to the public. If he is, he'll remain in prison. If he's not,
Chris, I'll just stick with you before I throw it back over to Peter, because as a criminal barrister, I wonder how would you personally feel if a death penalty was at play in your profession? Would you feel comfortable with a legal system that had the death penalty?
No, totally not, because I've been involved in cases where people have been wrongly convicted of murder, including 3 black men who were convicted of a murder in the early 1990s of a woman called Lynette White, who was subsequently freed many years later on appeal. And it turned out that the murder was committed by a white man on DNA evidence. And if we had the death penalty, those 3 black men would have been hanged and or electrocuted or poisoned or whatever it would be. So, of course not. We can't have the death penalty in a civilised country. It's the risk of killing innocent people is far too high. And the evidence is that the death penalty is counterproductive and actually doesn't reduce crime at all.
Peter, how do you feel? Because as a former Scotland Yard detective, I mean, you might have ended up having to arrest this guy a couple of times, for example. It must be a bit soul-destroying in that regard. But, I don't know, on a personal note, how do you feel about the death penalty?
Well, firstly, as a detective, you have to be pragmatic. So when you arrest people, whether they be murderers or somebody that's a robber or a burglar, at the end of the day, you gather the evidence, give it to the CPS, and you have to kind of park it, because sometimes you get perverse verdicts and all manner of things. So be pragmatic, do your job. Personally, I remember not so long ago, there was a certain Home Secretary that was talking about 3 strikes and you're out, or actually 3 strikes and you're going to be in. Some could argue that Mr Venables has hit that 3 strikes bar, and therefore he should not be released. I'd love to have all the information in front of me that the parole board have got, but we can only go by what we're told. I would think very, very long and hard about letting this man out onto the streets of Britain.
Yeah, indeed, and there are layers to it. Chris, can you just tell me a little bit about how the parole board actually works? Because we've had numerous situations recently. There was the John Warboys stuff. I mean, to be fair, we hear about the ones that you could argue they get wrong. I mean, Colin Pitchfork as well, I think, was pretty dodgy, to be honest with you. It was, really, wasn't it? Because he got recalled. But how does the parole board actually work? Because there is potentially a misconception. Some people think they're a bit of a shadowy group of people. They're not actually that shadowy if you look into them, but that make decisions that won't affect their lives but might affect my life because this guy might come and move in next door to me.
Well, that's true of a jury who decides whether someone's guilty of a crime in the first place. It's true of the judge who decides what sentence to impose. The parole board's role is very straightforward. The parole board is a public body. Its members are publicly known, as you've just pointed out. They're made up of people from a range of backgrounds, lawyers, former judges, and a variety of other people with experience and expertise in criminal justice and psychology and all of the other elements that go into the decision. But the simple process is this. The parole board looks at all of the evidence about this person, and it's an extensive range of evidence, as I said earlier, involving all sorts of medical, psychiatric and other assessments, as well as all of the prison records and all of the criminal records and everything else. And the parole board really has to make one decision, and it's not made by a single person, it's made by a group of members of the parole board. And that decision is this person a risk to the public? Does this person pose a risk to the public? If the evidence causes them to the conclusion that the person remains a risk to the public, parole is refused. And I should tell you this, that whatever the parole board's decision, it can be challenged in the High Court by the Justice Secretary, by members of the public or anyone else, and a High Court judge will then review the decision very carefully and has the power to quash the parole board's decision, whether it be to release or not to release. So there are many, many layers before a decision is made to release someone on parole, and all of those decisions can be challenged in court.
Yeah, Peter, how do you feel about the fact that cases like this, in my opinion, make it very easy to go, we're too soft, we're far too soft here, you know? We've got a guy here who's killed a toddler, sickening, OK, he was a child at the time, right? But then he's gone on to commit 2 crimes also involving children. We can't chemically castrate the guy, apparently. We can't kill him. So, you know, what's the best thing to do now? Just lock him up forever? That seems to be tricky. He's got a parole hearing. Do you think we are too soft on some of these people?
Well, the parole board has made pretty catastrophic mistakes, as you rightly point out, most notably and most recently, of course, Colin Pitchfork.
Yeah.
Let's remember, Some of these prisoners who are incarcerated for years are very, very deceitful and dangerous people. They plot and they hatch and they hoodwink and they are able to completely fool people into thinking that they are safe to be released. So to answer your question, please, if I may briefly, prevention is better than cure.
Very quickly, sorry, I'm going to get shouted at very quickly. How much does it cost to give someone a new identity, roughly? Do you know?
Fortunes. I wouldn't know now, but when I was given a new identity and placed in witness protection, it cost tens upon tens of thousands of pounds.
Good grief. Well, cost of living crisis or why? Peter, thank you very much. Peter Blexley there, former Scotland Yard detective and criminal barrister Chris Dorr. Great to have you both on the show. Good stuff that, even though it isn't completely and utterly morbid topic. GBViews at GBNews.uk. Where do you stand? I think you can guess. I've got the emails in front of me here coming in thick and fast about whether or not John Venables should be released from prison. That's one of the people who killed little James Bolger and indeed has been sent back to prison as well for child porn offences. This is GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. Coming up, the British Medical Association is warning that the NHS is in danger of complete collapse with large numbers of medical professionals leaving the service. I will speak to the BMA next. There's also a bit of a medical theme running through the course this final hour because I'm asking you whether or not you regret or felt hoodwinked when it came to having the coronavirus jab after it's emerged that apparently Pfizer didn't test to see whether or not the jab actually reduced transmission before they put it out on the market and before we were, in my opinion, told rather a lot about how evil we might be if we didn't get the vaccine. Not for ourselves, but to protect others. That's after the break.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Yes, this is indeed the same story we hear at this time every single year and have done since the NHS was founded. But some of the UK's leading doctors are warning that the NHS is in danger of collapse. In a British Medical Association poll, it was revealed that more than 2 in 5 of the most senior hospital medics are planning to leave the NHS within the next year. The BMA has called for immediate government action after the survey suggested pay and pension tax arrangements are the reasons medics are planning to leave. Meanwhile, 9 in 10 consultants said that this year's pay rise of 4.5% was inadequate or completely unacceptable. Joining me now is Simon Walsh, thank you very much, who's the Deputy Chair of the BMA Consultants Committee. Great to have you on the show. What does a consultant earn?
Well, there's a pay scale of consultants, and which progresses from when one starts as a consultant, and it progresses up with seniority with over increments over the years. But very much in a small step up from what a consultant in training earns, and then it progresses as you would expect it to, with the sort of growing experience and seniority. But the point of this
sorry. Just quickly. I do want to hear you out, and I do understand, that times are incredibly tough. But I really do have to drill down on this because it's important for people to understand if they might not be able to see a consultant now, or whether or not they might want to back you, for example. Unless I missed it out, what does a consultant earn? What's the pay scale? Because like any job, you start lower down and you earn your way up, don't you?
Yeah, so I actually haven't got the figures in front of me, but so I think the pay scale is something which I'd have to go and check exactly. I wouldn't want to give the wrong information. But crucially, you don't think they're paid enough. Well, it's not just me that thinks they're not paid enough. It's consultants themselves. When we surveyed them, that from our 8,000 respondents, as you said, nearly half of them not only don't think they're paid enough, but they're planning to leave the NHS or to reduce their work.
The BMA surveyed consultants. Those consultants who had a 4.5% pay rise said that they still didn't think they were being paid enough. You are the chair of the BMA Consultants Committee, and you don't know what they're paid.
Well, it's in front of me. I don't want to give the wrong figure for the actual pay scale, but the point is that a 4.5% uplift, to describe it, is actually a pay cut in the setting of inflation that's much higher than 4.5%, as it has been for over the last since 2008. Consultants' pay has been reduced by 35% because of subsequent sub-inflationary pay awards.
But it's hard to judge, isn't it? It's very, very hard to judge now for the British public as to whether or not those consultants actually really do need a pay rise in line with inflation, given that, of course, everyone's going through a cost of living crisis, because we don't know, do we now, what they're actually paid to begin with?
It's definitely something that people can look up and get the exact figure. I don't want to give the wrong figure without...
You are the BMA's... You are the chair of the BMA's Consultants Committee, and one thing that people might be concerned at is the idea that if consultants decide that they're going to walk away, or dare I say it, go on a strike or something like this, then people will die. And if the singular reason is that they're doing that, it would appear overpay. It might be nice for us, the British public, to have a frame of reference as to what it is they're actually paid, so we can decide whether or not we should give them a pay rise. But we don't know, do we? You don't know what that is.
Well, the pay of the consultants is decided by government pay awards, and they're supposedly advised by an independent review body that should give them an actual fair assessment of what consultants and other doctors should be paid. But the problem is that the review body has not been independent for many years because it's constrained by what the government tells them they can afford. So that's resulted in subsequent, in year-on-year, sub-inflationary pay awards, so that consultants are being paid 35% less than they were in 2008. And I don't think many people would say that the consultants are worth less, a third less money in their salary for the work they're doing in that time, particularly when we've just come through a pandemic where people have absolutely relied upon consultants leading services in hospitals. And,
if I was a consultant now, I'd be thinking, OK, maybe I do feel underpaid, and the deputy chair of my union, essentially, is on here trying to put the case forward for my pay. It might be nice if he knew what I was being paid. And you're saying, what is it, something like a 30% cut in in line with inflation. Is that right? It's not looking very convincing to me. And I dare say when patients have got issues at the moment where, you know, there's a massive, massive waiting list for routine treatments, etc. It's hard to see a GP at the moment. People have got catastrophic mental health problems. Kids as well, for example, are really struggling with their mental health. People are lacking faith, maybe, when it comes to the NHS at the minute, and they're already on the fence as to whether or not to give them a pay rise. What is it that you want them to be paid? Have you got a figure for that, at least? Because you don't seem to know what they're paid now. Oh, well, I think we've probably drilled down.
I just want to be clear, this isn't...
No, well, if we've got... Look, to be honest with you, there's no point having an interview with some... No, all right, Simon, that's enough. Thank you very much. Simon Walsh there. Sorry, you keep dropping out, I'm afraid, but doesn't seem to be too much point anyway, because I couldn't get to the root of what they're actually paid. Simon Walsh, though, is the Deputy Chair of the BMA Consultants Committee. Well, I don't think that was worth the paper it was written on, was it, unfortunately? What do you make of that, ladies and gentlemen? GBViews at gbnews.uk. Do you now have added sympathy for consultants that they're all hard done by? After the break, did you feel forced into getting the COVID vaccine? It's emerged now that Pfizer didn't test whether or not their vaccine stopped you transmitting COVID onto others. It's a big issue, this. Hopefully we can get at least some answers out of the two people we're going to interview on this. I'll discuss that next. But first, see the latest news headlines.
Patrick, thank you. Good evening to you. The latest news headlines from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says she's absolutely sticking to her pledge not to cut public spending as she continues to defend her government's mini-budget. Liz Truss fended off questions from the Labour leader in her first PMQs since the Chancellor unveiled his plans for the economy. Sir Keir Starmer called Kwasi Kwarteng's plans madness and said it had sent the economy into turmoil.
Who voted this? Not working people paying for tax cuts to the largest companies. Who voted for this? Not even most of the MPs behind her who know you can't pay for tax cuts on the never, never. Does she think the public will ever forgive the Conservative Party if they keep on defending this madness and go ahead with a kamikaze budget? Yeah.
Well, the Prime Minister responded by saying the budget will keep families secure for the next 2 winters.
It's made sure that we're going to see higher economic growth, lower inflation and more opportunities. The way that we will get our country growing is through more jobs, more growth, more opportunities, not through higher taxes, higher spending and his friends in the union stopping hard-working people get to work.
Meanwhile, the Bank of England says its emergency bond buying scheme put in place to stabilise the markets after the Chancellor's mini-budget will close this Friday. Pension funds will need to find billions of pounds by then to make sure they can withstand market turmoil. The bank has warned of challenges for some households in dealing with the projected rise in the cost of essentials alongside higher interest rates. Official figures show the UK's economy unexpectedly shrank by 0.3% in August. The Office for National Statistics says the fall was because of a slowdown in manufacturing, with customer-facing businesses like retail, hairdressers and hotels struggling. Some of the fall was partially offset by a stronger-than-usual summer performance by the professional services sector. Those are your latest news headlines. You're up to date on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel. Don't go anywhere. We're back in just a moment.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Yeah, welcome back, everybody. This is a massive, massive issue that I know is very close to a lot of your hearts. It appears that a senior Pfizer executive has admitted that the drug company didn't know whether its COVID-19 vaccine prevented transmission of the virus when it began rolling out the jabs globally. So Janine Small, who is Pfizer's President of International Developed Markets, was testifying before the European Union Parliament on Monday when she was asked by Dutch MEP and fast-becoming household name Rob Roos if the pharmaceutical giant had tested the vaccine on stopping the transmission of the virus before it entered the market. Just going to repeat that, on stopping the transmission of the virus before it entered the market. Here's what she said.
Regarding the question around did we know about stopping immunisation before it's entered the market? No. We had to really move at the speed of science to really understand what is taking place in the market.
OK, now let me just whiz you back to April last year, where Public Health England released research suggesting that one dose of the COVID-19 vaccine can cut household transmission by up to half. Here's what they said. This new research shows that those who do become infected 3 weeks after receiving one dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech or AstraZeneca vaccine were between 38% and 49% less likely to pass the virus on to their household contacts than those who were unvaccinated. So, with pressure put on many of us to get that jab to protect your family and stop transmission, and that's the big issue for me. It's not just about whether or not you want to get it for yourself. Fine. If the answer to that question was no, and you felt as though that you really had to get it because society and the media and whoever else was telling you that if you didn't get it, you were potentially responsible for the deaths of others, that's an issue, isn't it? Does this new admission from Pfizer's president change your mind about the reasons behind you getting that jab? I actually went out a little bit earlier on and just asked some members of the great British public about this.
To protect myself, to protect others. It's all about protection. I think you were safer with it than without it, on the balance of evidence.
I did get pressured, especially with travelling and things like that. Obviously, I've had a baby now, she's 3 months. I'm due to have a booster. I don't really want it, but I do feel like to travel, I need it.
Lots of people did. I mean, I've never had so many emails from the NHS. Having said that, I think the NHS are fantastic and they've done a brilliant job.
Okay.
But
and you think Pfizer should have been more honest?
I think all of them should have been more honest. Government, everyone.
Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want to protect yourself against anything that's a potential viral infection?
Was any of it to potentially protect others as well?
What? No, just more for myself.
Just for you?
I'm very selfish in that front, no.
My mother's diabetic and my father's in a care home, so it's mainly, I mean, I've gone through mental health issues and depression, so I don't value my life as much due to going through a severe bout of depression, but I value other people's around me.
Can I just ask you, it's emerged that Pfizer now have come out and said that they didn't know at the time that they were rolling this out whether or not the COVID vaccine actually stopped you giving it to others.
Okay, no,
do you think they could have been more honest about that?
Of course they should, yeah, 100% it should have been, yeah, because that was the whole point of it, right? It was to stop us spreading it.
Don't kill well.
Yeah. I mean, how much did we see that on the TV? And if that's not the case and we was misled, then someone's got questions to answer, certainly.
Well, I suppose that's it, isn't it? Were we misled? Do people have questions to answer? Potentially, yes. I'm joined now by writer and broadcaster Emma Webb and consultant epidemiologist Professor Keith Neal. Great to have you both on the show. Now, consultant epidemiologist Professor Keith Neal, I will start with you, if that's all right. Can you understand why people feel quite miffed now that when we were being told, if you don't want to get a vaccine for yourself, then get it for the sake of others because you don't want to kill Granny? Actually, Pfizer, it appeared, didn't know whether or not the vaccine would stop you from killing Granny.
If you ask me, I think that Dutch MEP deliberately asked a misleading question.
OK.
We do know that the COVID vaccine, and where Pfizer knew the COVID vaccine stopped you catching it. It also, when you stopped you catching it, it stops you getting a milder illness. So if you don't catch it because the vaccine has protected you, and we knew that very early on from the trials, you can't spread it. The study you quote was done on UK health workers who were the first people to be vaccinated. And therefore, they were able to monitor their family members as part of an organised study, which was well conducted. So therefore, they were able to show that after a single dose, you got 50% reduction. Similar results came from Scotland. But I think if the vaccine stops the disease, it will stop you passing it on, full stop.
OK,
and it does that.
All right, well, hang on a minute. Sorry, Emma, I was going to throw it to you. Just one sec. The vaccine doesn't stop you getting the disease. I've had the vaccine and I've caught COVID, and loads of people have.
Yes, but you didn't end up in ITU or in hospital, which is the main
anyway. All right.
Okay, the main predictor of getting into ITU with COVID now is unvaccinated. It is 10 times higher than people on cancer treatment.
OK. All right. Emma, do you feel as though there was a media pressure or a societal pressure on people to get the vaccine, if not for themselves, but because if you didn't, then you're a granny killer?
Of course there was. And I think actually the important aspect of this is the ethical implications of it, because unlike other vaccines, this was something that became policy that prohibited people's autonomy. It stopped them from being able to move around, to attend certain events, to go to certain, not just in this country, but I mean across the world and in Europe as well. This idea that your autonomy could be restricted on the premise that this was preventing transmission. And so actually, if you follow that logic, it's also quite misleading as well, because it lures people into a false sense of security. For example, when I was traveling on an aeroplane quite recently, those people who weren't vaccinated would have been asked to take a test before they travel, so they would know for certain that they didn't have it. But those people who had the vaccine, who could catch it and transmit that onto others, didn't have to go through the same sorts of tests. So all of these controls and restrictions that I actually think are really against people's fundamental human rights were placed on them on a false premise. And I think that this just exposes that, and this is going to make people really distrust not only the medical profession, but also those who are making public health policy.
Professor Keith, do you not think Pfizer could have...
had COVID passports in this country? There were no restrictions differential between COVID vaccinated and unvaccinated people in the United Kingdom.
Not in this country, but there were around the world, weren't there? And there was a lot
we're not responsible for policy abroad.
No, but it's what Pfizer did globally, isn't it? Because if Pfizer had come out and said this generally, it's interesting that it's only just come out now. If they had done, then potentially one would have assumed that the vaccine uptake might have been a bit lower. And Professor Keith, it brings me on to my next point. The cynic in me, the absolute cynic in me, would say that Pfizer had potentially invested quite a lot of money in this jab, and it would not have been financially beneficial for them to have said, actually, we're not 100% sure whether or not this stops transmission.
There are plenty of vaccines that do not interfere with transmission. The meningitis B vaccine doesn't. The tetanus vaccine doesn't. The diphtheria vaccine doesn't. The diphtheria vaccine has saved millions of lives over the last 100 years. The aim of the vaccine is to stop you getting ill. If it stops you spreading it, that's a bonus.
But so that wasn't the message, though, was it, Keith?
They did not know that it stopped transmission because enough people hadn't been given it. She said at the start, enough people hadn't been given it to test that hypothesis. What we needed to know was, did it stop you getting ill?
OK, fair enough. But I suppose, Emma, I'll throw it back to you because on this, Emma, now, a lot of your TV doctors, right, were coming on telly and rejoicing, and they were parroting a line saying that it reduced transmission massively as well, which was a key factor in it. Do you feel now that potentially when you see doctors on telly in future, the vast majority of the public now might be more sceptical about what that doctor has to say as a result of this?
I think absolutely there will be. And I just want to come back on the points that were made there, because that just simply wasn't the way that this vaccine was sold to the British public. We were told that it was going to allow us to see our loved ones again, which implies that it would prevent transmission, but we know that it doesn't do that. And also the difference between this and other vaccines is that those vaccines weren't used to implement public health policies that limited people's autonomy. And it's just simply, as a fact check, not true to say that just because we didn't have COVID vaccine passports in this country as we did in other countries, that means that this point is irrelevant, because there were people in certain sectors who actually lost their jobs because they weren't vaccinated. And actually it did affect people's ability in this country to travel abroad for work or on holiday. That was a reason why many people got this vaccine. So there was a huge amount of pressure, basically threatening people's liberties if they didn't get this vaccine, and saying that it was the key to seeing your loved ones after being locked away from them for so long. So it's just simply not true to say that just because we didn't have the same vaccine passport system as, say, France or Germany or the United States, that means that this pressure that was put on people isn't of a significant degree that is based on this false idea that it prevents transmission.
Professor Keith, I'll let you come back to that.
Can I just come in? The Alpha variant was stopped by one dose of transmission. The Delta variant that came later needed 2 doses. And one of the reasons Omicron is spreading so quickly is that it's not stopped by vaccination. The point of vaccination is to stop you getting ill. If it stops you catching the disease, you cannot transmit it. And we know it stops disease. The fact that once you catch the disease, you get a milder form that is less likely to transmit. And I think going on about you couldn't go to France is not an argument, because essentially we were in a global pandemic emergency. And we have to know, what we want to know is, did the vaccine stop you getting ill? The advantage for wanting to go and see somebody in the care home is if they are protected against disease, then that is one of the reasons we were able to open out visiting. The fact that you are vaccinated as well is a bonus. I think we're confusing the aims of the vaccine policy.
Emma?
It's a bonus in transmission.
Okay. Emma, do you want to respond to that?
I think there are lots of people who got the vaccine because they believed that it would prevent transmission, because they believed that it was going to prevent them for, as you say, Patrick, killing granny. And so actually lots of people, unfortunately, I think they did feel that they were pressured into taking the vaccine just simply for reasons like wanting to go on holiday. And so I think that it's really important that the British public are able to trust the medical profession and those who make public health policies. And this is not the message that this news sends.
Okay, Professor Keith,
Omicron did stop transmission. That's well researched and well evidenced. It's just that it is now less effective at stopping transmission.
So is there much point in getting a COVID vaccine now? Just because, can I just speak from personal experience, Professor Keith? I had COVID before COVID was really a massive thing, and all right, I was a bit unwell. I therefore just understood the idea that I might have some antibodies. I didn't particularly want to get this jab, and one day I had just enough of the drip of the media and various different TV doctors and Chris Whitty and co, and even Dr. Fauci or whatever in America, and all of these people, and the societal pressure that I was in some way evil or didn't care about old people. So I went and got it. And when I got to the vaccine centre, by the way, I got grief for taking so long to actually turn up and get it, instead of just injecting me and letting me go on my way. And Professor Keith, I've got to be honest with you, I do think, like, some of the nasty elements, maybe some of the arrogant elements of the medical community came out when this vaccine got created.
I don't know. I think when you've seen people being ventilated and you've got pregnant women dying or being in ITU for 6 weeks, get real. I mean, I don't mean that personally. I've had COVID, and at 64, being triply vaccinated, that was a bonus. If you take an example, a very good friend of mine was undergoing chemotherapy for breast cancer. She caught COVID. If she hadn't been vaccinated beforehand, she could have ended up seriously ill. Her children were vaccinated to stop them bringing it into the household. Again, that protects the other person. So that's a bit not quite the same as protecting granny. It's protecting mothers.
OK, look, all right, look, thank you both of you very, very much for coming on and having that particular conversation. It's a tricky subject to talk about, but it's an important one nonetheless, and I'm glad that we could do it right here on GB News Live. That was writer and broadcaster Emma Webb and consultant epidemiologist Professor Keith Neal. What do you make of that, ladies and gentlemen? GBViews at gbnews.uk. I have actually... believe was a statement that I have to read out now, otherwise presumably something terrible happens to me. GB News reached out to Pfizer to request a right-to-reply statement. They got back to us. Good. This is what they said. The primary endpoints of our COVID-19 vaccine study were to evaluate the efficacy of the vaccine candidate in preventing COVID-19 disease in participants who had not been infected with the SARS-CoV-2 virus before they received the vaccine, and to evaluate potential prevention of COVID-19 disease in participants who had prior exposure to SARS-CoV-2. Good grief. To date, hundreds of millions of people around the world have received the vaccine, and yes, they have indeed. And public health agencies continue to publish real-world evidence on its effectiveness. Right, OK, so somewhat admonishing slightly there the idea that maybe Pfizer should have been slightly more proactive when it came to telling us that they didn't really have much of a clue as to whether or not this particular COVID vaccine actually prevented you from getting COVID. What I do find fascinating, though, is that they never once got in touch with Chris Whitty, did they? They never once got in touch, it would appear, to Fauci or any of these people, or indeed release a massive public statement at the time to us all and go, just FYI, that bloke who you've just seen on your telly telling you that this jab reduces transmission, we don't actually know that's true. So when he's telling you that if you don't get it for yourself, get it so that you don't kill an elderly person, otherwise you're a heartless, evil so-and-so, that might not be true either. They didn't do that, did they? They didn't stop that. But anyway, GBViews at gbnews.uk. Right. We're moving on, people, and I thought we'd keep it light towards the end of the show because it's been quite heavy stuff this final hour, although it's been good stuff. Get ready, strap yourselves in, quite literally, because a woman has been scammed by a man who posed as a Russian astronaut, claiming that he needed £27,000 to land back on Earth. This story's got it all. The scammer found the 65-year-old Japanese woman on Instagram and promised to marry her when he reached Earth again. The only thing that stood in the way of their love was that he needed a stack of cash to acquire a rocket and pay expensive landing fees. This is absolutely bonkers. Joining me now is Elaine Parker, the CEO of Safer Date, a dating app which ID checks its users to prevent situations like this occurring. Now, we are going to talk a little bit about... Look, because some people do get scammed, and that is very, very serious, right? And there is a serious undertone to this, especially old women who play online bingo and stuff. But this is bonkers. Surely you would never believe a chap who says he's in space, he needs you to send him 27 grand for rocket fuel, and who's he buying the rocket off? He's in space, and then land back down to Earth. But even by some of the standards that you must get, this is a bit bonkers, isn't it?
Yes, it's definitely one of the more crazy stories that I've heard. But, you know, these are the types of stories that make the news and people laugh. And, you know, there'll be comments on there saying that she actually deserves to be scammed because she's been so stupid. But, you know, they don't realise what goes on behind the scenes and how they prey on people to gain trust. And it's not just these really outlandish scams, you know, it's the smaller stories as well, you know, the ones that don't make the news that really accumulate behind the scenes. It's a really big problem.
I was hoping that, on a serious note, because I do know some people who've been scammed and stuff, especially when I was working as a local reporter, you do get a lot, sadly, of these cases. Sadly, quite often when it comes to elderly or vulnerable people as well, who don't always see the signs. Can I just ask, can you give some people some top tips of what to look out for if they're concerned that they are being scammed?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, firstly, I think it's really important that people know that there aren't any regulations whatsoever for the dating industry. And most dating apps do absolutely nothing to either identify their customers or keep people safe. So, you know, as a result of that, they give criminals their very own playground. There's full companies out there that are actually set up to use dating apps with fake profiles to con people out of their savings. 92 million was lost just in the UK alone last year. In America, it was $1 billion just last year to romance fraud. So firstly, you know, have a look at where you're actually dating online. Make sure that they do something to protect you, that there's identity checks in place. And, you know, if you are on a dating app, use common sense first and foremost. If somebody is telling you they're on the moon, chances are they're not. But, it goes a lot further than that. People tend to use love bombing, which is a case of they'll use all of your personal information to gain your trust and make you feel like the best person in the world. And then the sob story tends to start, and that'll trickle in. Then they'll start asking you for money, and it might just be £100 at first, not 27,000 or whatever this lady was conned out of. It can be small amounts that then build up. So use your common sense and never, ever give money away online. Never do.
Good stuff. Good advice to finish the show. Thank you very much, Elaine. Great to have you on the show and keep up the good work. Elaine Parker, the CEO of Safer Dates. Right, OK, better late than never. That's all it is for today. You've been watching and listening to GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. Michelle Dewberry is up next with Jubes & Co. Normally I throw to her and ask her what's coming up, but apparently that's not happening now. So I'll be back tomorrow to see you at 3 p.m. See you before then, but before that is the weather.
Good evening, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. Tomorrow looking pretty good for most places. If you're after dry and bright October fare, it will be fairly damp and misty across much of the south, and some more wet and windy weather will be arriving in the far northwest, courtesy of these weather fronts arriving from the Atlantic. This one is currently with us, and it's just slowly dribbling its way southwards, and it will bring more cloud and drizzly rain across parts of southern England and South Wales overnight. A few showers elsewhere, but much of Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England will eventually turn dry and clear. And with light winds here, it's going to turn quite cold. Temperatures even in urban areas down to 3 or 4 degrees Celsius. So in the countryside, there will be some pockets of frost, but we're well above freezing in the far south. But it will be quite a grey, misty, murky start for much of the Midlands, southern England and South Wales. I think along the south coast of England, it'll stay fairly cloudy for much of the day, with likely to see further outbreaks of rain just running from west to east. So a bit damp and drizzly here. But as I said, for many places, dry and a bright day with some sunshine. It will turn wet and windy across the Highlands and the Western Isles late in the day. In the sunny spells, temperatures mid-teens, so round about average for the time of year. Through the course of the evening, I think we'll continue to see this rain across the south, perhaps affecting the southeast a little more during the evening time. The rain in Scotland will push south, followed by another band of rain for Scotland and Northern Ireland as we go through the early hours of Friday morning. Quite blustery here too. Friday's, again, a real mishmash with further pulses of rain across the south and a lot of cloud. A band of rain sinking south across the north. Either side of that, there'll be some sunny spells, but with blustery showers in the far northwest. Again, temperatures likely to be close to average come the afternoon. Feeling pleasant if you get a bit of sunshine, but not feeling too clever if you're stuck with the cloud and the outbreaks of rain. The changeable theme continues into the weekend.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero.